Okay, we are now recording.
Okay, so let's call to order the agenda up here. The March 28th, 2022 meeting of the Vermont Community Broadband Board. In terms of board members present, we have Brian Otley, Dan Nelson, myself. We're expecting Laura and Holly to join in shortly, but right now it's the three of us. Staff, we have Christine, Rob, Alyssa, and Stan. And with that, I'm going to ask, are there any changes to the agenda that were circulated?
I'll just make one point. We have Andres Arietta joining us at 12:30. And if that extends over into the budget, I would say let's compress the budget part of the discussion, because we aren't looking for an approval today. We're looking for a discussion, so we can continue the budget discussion at a following meeting. So I don't want necessarily the board to feel that they're compressed to that time slot. But I say let's compress the budget discussion, continue it later, because we really do want to get to the purchase of materials in the Chittenden County's CUD town discussion. We think that's important to make sure.
I just heard from Laura, she got pulled into a mandatory work meeting till 1 p.m. now. So okay. She'll be joining us then.
Okay, great. Thanks for that update. Okay, happy, Christine, to do a time certain at 12:30 for agenda item 4. And as you said, we can always come back into the budget as necessary. So let's take a motion to approve the budget, or sorry, to approve the agenda as listed.
Make a motion. Oh, there's Holly.
All right, I'll second that motion. Is there any discussion?
So Holly has her hand up. She just joined.
Hi, Holly.
Hi, this is not just hello. I would like to see us move the agenda item regarding equity lower in the agenda. My reasoning for that is that there's pretty specific urgency around the materials policy and the budget from my point of view. And unless Christine feels strongly that we do need to address this first, I think we could move the equity discussion to later in the agenda so that we don't miss the important materials discussion and budget discussion.
Okay,
yeah, that's fine, Holly. You might have missed. I was saying we can certainly compress the budget discussion, because we're not necessarily looking for an approval of this meeting. Really looking to introduce it to the board to this meeting. I mean, if you happen to give us approval, I'd be surprised, but pleasantly surprised. But
why don't we move the item 3, equity and affordability, to just above staff updates?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
If that's all right with you, Christine.
Oh yeah, no problem. I was also saying, Holly, that we can compress. I don't want to, we've got this Andres joining us at 12:30, and I don't want the board to feel pressured that we have to fit within that time slot either. I want the board to make sure they take advantage of the fact that this person from Electronic Frontier Foundation is spending their time with us.
Okay, Dan, can we make a motion to amend as moving item 3 to just above staff updates?
Yes.
Okay, I'll second that. Are there any more discussion to the agenda? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, the ayes have it. The agenda stands as amended. First item for action is approval of the March 14th, 2022 minutes. Can I have a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Dan seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Minutes are approved. I'm removing item 3 to later on. Data and privacy will take up at 12:30. Do you want to kick off the budget discussion, Christine?
Sure. Rob, are you going to put the budget presentation up?
Sure. Are we going to be able to do that between now and 12:30? I guess we can
Well,
come
let me
back to
just
it.
start. Let me just, that one thing that presentation doesn't cover is the requested changes we have for this year's budget. So let me hit on that. And then we'll go into next year's budget.
Christine, are those
Christine,
I'm a
what
little
would help? This is Patty. I'm going to jump in, Rob.
Sorry.
What would help with this discussion is if you can orient us to what we have in our packets. I'm going to confess I got a little confused with what we have because it seems like there's 2 sections that are redundant. So it would be very helpful to get an orientation of what we're looking at.
Yeah, so you start with your cover page, which is the discussion about the end of year forecast. And then the budget goes into the detail. But we'll start with the end of year forecast. It says, we're looking, if you look at our
what cover page are we looking at? Could we just orient to the materials?
Yeah, unfortunately it's not. I'm not sure it's paginated here. Let me look.
In the PDF packet, it's page 19.
Page 19. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So what you're going to see is we have we're requesting some moving around of the budget to address these 3 programs we would like to start before the end of the year. If you look at what happens with our contracted services, you're going to see on a line item we're over budget by 469,000. These added items equal 470,000. That's why that's over budget by 469 something. It's essentially you're over budget by 470,000, and this is what's driving it. We're taking that money from training and education because we did not spend the workforce development money this year. But the important thing here, the important change to the budget, and it's a significant change, are these 3 line items that we're recommending we get done right away because there's a strong need.
Christine, I'm just going to interrupt you for a second. I'm still lost. So I'm apologizing that I'm not just tracking. And if I'm the only one, Patty, feel free to move on. But what I'd love to know is we're over in contracted services, right?
By 469,000, right? Yeah.
Right. Can you tell us what constitutes that? Like why?
Yeah. So go to the cover sheet, which it says it right there. 2021 end of year forecast. It's on page 19. So
yeah, I'm looking at it.
So if you look at these 3 added programs that we are recommending we do, statewide estimate and high-level design costs for non-CUD towns, we're estimating $150,000 in contracted services there.
Yep.
Statewide program to challenge FCC maps, $200,000 there, and logistics and application support, applications to the BETA quality grants, BETA equity grants, $120K. So the statewide estimate for non-CUD towns, that's become quite urgent because we've got I believe we've got about 8% of our underserved addresses are in towns that are not tied to a CUD, and we don't have estimates for those costs. And of course, the goal being that we get every Vermonter connected to 100 by 100. It's really important that we have those costs. So we reached out to get some estimates of what we can get that for. So let's take these one at a time. Rob, do you want to add anything to that statewide estimate statement, or should we just go right into board discussion?
I was just going to suggest that maybe we should go back to how we thought we were going to discuss the budget rather than skipping ahead of this, of talking about the authority, talking about what we need to get accomplished in the next 18 months, and then getting into the numbers. I think some context will help here, as I could understand how this could be a little bit overwhelming without the context. I don't know if that is
Yeah, okay,
helpful
that's
or
fine.
not, but that's kind of what
Yeah.
I'm thinking, but that's up to the board.
I'm going to leave it to you as to however you want to present it, but I'm going to reiterate what Holly said. The material so far is a little confusing. So we just need to get oriented as to what we're looking at.
So Holly, your hand is still up. I don't know if it's
Whoops, no,
supposed
no,
to-
no, no.
Okay,
We could say that maybe my hand should always be up, but that's another issue.
Holly, yeah, I'm not going there. Why don't we start with discussing what our authority is going forward and get the board feeling on that? 'Cause we only have 15 minutes and we might
Yeah,
need a
that's
little
a good
time to
idea,
think
Rob.
about that. So I'm just going to
Yeah,
share my screen so everybody can see it, but it's page
and
14 of the packet.
that's good suggestion, Rob. Stan, why don't you take that away?
Sure. This is, I looked into Act 71, and there is a provision in Act 71 that, well, 30 VSA 8084A6 lists all the authority of the VCBB. And the final provision of that section is a catch-all, which says that the VCBB can do any and all things necessary or convenient to effectuate the purposes and provisions of this chapter, which is the entire Act 71, and to carry out its purposes and exercise the powers given and granted in this chapter. That, I believe, is very broad authority for the VCBB to take action to effectuate the purposes and provisions of Act 71. So we have taken action regarding specific parts of this, the pre-construction program, the construction program, but this provision empowers the board to do more than that. We believe that there are examples of things that the board could do, such as providing timely discretionary grants to VCUDA, to the CUDs, to non-member towns, to create a program to pay premiums to telecom workers who participate in building broadband, to provide grants for materials purchase or to solve one-off problems regarding the build out of fiber. Based on this, we'd like to make a motion to seek board approval to enter into grants or take other steps as we enumerated in this memo, as well as any and all things necessary or convenient to the VCBB's mandate, with the understanding that staff will keep the board apprised of any grant or other activities in this regard, and within the budget as approved. So any line items that we would spend would be highlighted in the budget.
It should also be noted that Finance and Management and Guidehouse have repeatedly expressed to us that in the final Treasury rules, there is a push to use non-competitive supplementary grants in order to accomplish your mission because of the abbreviated time frame. We understand that there needs to be barriers on this, and I think making sure that it's within the budget is one of those key ones.
Okay, Holly
Holly?
has her hand up.
Yes, I do. So I'd like my colleagues on the board to focus on the motion, and I appreciate where the attempt is here to say, really, what's the bright line where staff can make discretionary spends and where there has to be an approved grant program? I think that's the question. There is a difference between staff taking steps to perform any and all things necessary or convenient, and for the board to take those steps or authorize those steps. So there's a point at which I don't understand where the fiduciary duty of the directors lies. And so I am bringing that up because I want to be sure that we as directors understand that. So I look to Stan to give us guidance on that. And the second thing that I think is material here is that there's some specific examples here. And I believe that they fall within the purposes and powers granted in this chapter, which happens to be, I believe in section 83, maybe, there's a specific list of purposes. And most of the things that are on this 3-bullet list do fall within those purposes, although I am not sure that the first bullet would be in that category, except unless we look at materials, technical, legal support, etc. That is as long as it's within the budget, that's great. I just want directors to focus on that's a big category of as necessary. So I'm a little, I don't know where to go on that. So that's my question.
I'm just going to clarify one thing that, like, I think that we all understand that if it's a grant, whether it's discretionary or other, it has to come to the board for approval. I think that clarification helps. It might also be useful to note the shared services to the CUDs is one of the other things that this is under.
Yeah, and I'll make the point too that one of the things that the Guidehouse and the administration and the Office of Finance and Management are clear about from Treasury guidelines is they actually prefer discretionary grants. So that's why we're emphasizing this. You know, with this material thing, we've, you know, when we looked at it from all sides, it came out, you know, that the recommendation was to.
Christine, I have to ask you though, whose discretion? Yours, Rob's, the board's?
Well, it would be the boards, as Rob said. By definition, we're going to be coming to the board for grant approval.
Like, for instance, if we were going to do a grant program as shared services to the CUDs, we would ask the board to create that grant program and approve the grant to Vacuda or whatever entity. Like,
are there non-grant expenditures that would be at the discretion of staff without any board involvement that you envision?
Well, yeah. For example, so now we'll skip back. Not that I want to have a discussion yet, because I think this is the right path we're taking. But you know, we've got 3 large budget items that we're recommending for changes for this year. Those are not grants. Those are money that the VCB will be spending to do contracted service. So we'll do contracted services through RFPs, which follows bulletin 3.5. But when it comes to the CUDs and we'll be doing grant programs. Rob, you want to clarify that too? Help clarify what I just said?
I'm going to attempt to go there. I think if it's spelled out in the budget that we're doing a contract for something, that you're approving it with the contract. We're approving it with the budget. But when it comes to for a grant program, we're going to ask you before we start initiating a grant program or start asking for approval for grants.
Yeah, that's good. That really directly answers your question, I think, Brian, which is other things other than grants. Yes, there are contracts.
So this is Patty jumping in. Would you envision that the board is approving the concept of a particular grant, and then as applicants come in and apply, then that's less level to approve each that come in as long as they're within the confines and the structure of the grant that it has been approved?
Yes.
That's a question for Christine or Rob.
Yeah, That's a yes.
Okay.
And we'll be budgeting, when we come to a grant program, we will be coming in with an amount of that, an estimated amount for that program.
So as a hypothetical, if the VCBB board approved 30 million in pre-construction grant dollars to be issued, then we basically are delegating to staff the individual applications that come in and the decisions around those applications.
I don't believe so. We would be coming back to you for the board decision on approving the grants themselves. We would be
Okay.
talking to the board in terms of like, oh, we would like to issue a grant for this. We would like to do a grant program for this.
But by
And then
contrast,
individual.
Rob, if the budget authorized you to spend, I don't know, $300,000 on workforce improvements, and you did an RFP to spend that money through a contractor, you would not anticipate the board reviewing that expenditure.
We would expect the board to have additional questions. We would expect us to keep the board informed about what we're doing in terms of those programs, but that wouldn't be something where the board would have just like the board doesn't have the final decision on who we approve our outside legal assistance contract to. It would be the same situation in that, as opposed to where if it's a grant, we're going to bring it to the board for discussion and formal approval.
Yeah, but there's decisions that involve dollars and there's just decisions that don't, right? So like who you choose as a contracted service, understand completely, but the dollars to pay that contracted service winner come out of the budget, which is the board provides oversight to, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So like, I don't know, I'm just going to cut to it. On page 19, the three things you're recommending a reallocation on, that I'm assuming because the 470 is offset by the 469, that it's budget neutral, but it is a reallocation. And so I would expect that that's going to get reviewed. It's going to get recommended from staff or recommended by staff to be reviewed by the board and then signed off on by the board. And then, of course, any grant expenditure is going to get board approved, right? I mean, I don't even think we have to discuss that anymore. That's just done. Right?
Yeah, I think that gets into also, where that begs the question, where's the dollar cutoff, right, between what we have authority to?
Sure. Yep, I agree with that. So is there a proposal?
Normally, wouldn't there be a signature authority for the executive director and so on?
Yeah, we don't have a policy on that. I would recommend that we develop a policy on that, but for the time being, let's, I would say if it's under 50,000, the standard policy I've worked on has been under $50,000. The executive director has authority. Anything over that, as long as it's within budget and offset. But let's not, let's make this a temporary policy until I can come in with a recommended. I think we should have a policy. This gets to board policies, right? This is probably a policy we need right away. There's plenty out there, so I can bring something in. So I'll throw it out there. I recommend $50,000 be the approval limit of the executive director.
Well, why don't we come back with a formal policy on that? But this is just about our overall authority that we can use grants as a tool, that we agree on that.
Well, the motion doesn't really say it that way, though, right? So I'd like to go back to the $50,000. I'd just like to say out loud that I could see my way clear to a limit that was higher than that, like $100,000, because this is expensive business. Your legal bills are more than $100,000, for example. But every good executive director, and I'm sure Christine, you're in that bucket, would err on the side of caution so that you don't find yourself at the end of a limb with the board on the other end. So I'm sure you'll keep us apprised.
Oh, yes.
So I'm going to echo what Rob said. I think we need to have more of a policy in front of us versus just kind of taking a whiff at this. I'd like to see something in writing put forward. Stan, your memo is, it's helpful, but the words that are put here for a suggested motion to me are wide open. There's very little in terms of guardrails, and to me, I read it as that staff would be doing all grant approvals. It looked very wide open to me. And
we can certainly tailor it.
Yeah, if what you're trying to do is work up, some sort of authority for Christine to approve things under 100,000, that's very different than what your memo says. So I would just suggest coming back with something specific of what you're looking for in a policy statement.
Well, wait a second. Before we do that, there are two components of this resolution. One takes into consideration the spending authority of the executive director, but the other, more importantly for the immediate purposes, the recognition that we have the authority to enter into grants. Want to make sure the board agrees with that, because that gets into some of the other items that we need to talk about that are very time sensitive in this meeting.
Who's we in the we have the authority to enter into grants? Is it the board, or is it the staff, or is it the executive director?
By definition, it's the board, and the board is the staff and the board. Well, this ties into what I said earlier. We will come to you for approval on grants, but the board, the VCBB, has the authority to enter into grants, and that is one of the preferred grants with the CUDs and others. That is something that the board has authority to, and it's a preferred method from the Treasury and Guidehouse.
So might I suggest, since we have our guest is at 12:30, that we'll quickly rework the text of the motion and then can discuss it afterwards?
That's good.
You're on mute.
Yeah, that helps.
Okay.
Okay, so I am going to introduce Andres. Andres has generously, on short notice, agreed to come in, present some of the concerns of privacy. And Andres, if you could introduce yourself, that would be great. And you can take it away from there.
Hi. Let me know if you don't have the ability to share your screen, and I will try to make that happen. I made you a presenter, but who knows if that actually worked.
Thank you. I don't think I need to share a screen. Thank you all for having me. I'm Andres Arrieta. I'm the Director of Consumer Privacy Engineering at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. We're the leading nonprofit that has been fighting for civil liberties in the digital world for 3 years now. And we're a team of activists, lawyers, technologists, and we just fight to improve people's lives when it comes to technology. We do this via policy, with activism. We get involved in a lot of the bills and laws, not just in the US, but across the world. And we also build technology. Our teams have built like extensions that block trackers online, that have helped encrypt the web. And now we're the largest certificate of authority, but by most metrics. And we just do like digital forensics. We help activists and journalists protect themselves. And so we're there trying to understand and translate the technology with the policy and help people protect themselves. And so we see as privacy as a fundamental assurance for society. And it is a fundamental human right to begin with. And many times just the threat of it not necessarily existing there or could be not there has chilling effects in our freedom of speech. So this is why we take particular care, and broadband service providers sit in a particularly important part of the internet infrastructure, especially when it comes to our right to privacy, because they serve as the interconnection agents that carries our data and interconnect us with others, which is what the internet is, right? It's just interconnections. So they have the power to control the flow, to block or to look at the details of these packets they carry for us. For this reason, it's essential that they provide communities with assurances and that they will not discriminate by zip code or by type of data, or that they will use access to our data that they're carrying in ways that are not wanted nor expected by communities. So I'm going to try to go through some of the historical things that ISPs, both mobile and broadband fixed, have done, and hopefully that will start giving you a picture of the technical capabilities of what they can do and some of the things we're concerned with. In particular, because there's a power imbalance. We know that most Americans don't have a choice. So that already takes away their power. The laws aren't here in the US to protect properly people. Either there aren't any, or most are what we call an opt-out. So users have to go and do something to tell whomever's providing them with the service that they don't want their data used. Which is weird when we talk about a world where like it's a human right. You would think that that means that by default you're getting privacy, but unfortunately that is not. So ISPs have a long history of abuse, a very long history of abuse. And with all the outcry from and public pressure, we just keep seeing these types of abuses come back in different technical ways. So, which is why for us, like what you're trying to do is great, because like the empty promises are worthless. They will always say they care about their customers, but they don't. So one of the things that they have done in the past is something called deep packet inspection. So when you transmit something on the internet, it's split into packets. And deep packet inspection means that you look at the packet and you look beyond just like from where you're taking it to where, right? Like you look at the full contents of the packet and you try to understand what the packet is. And although this technique does have some legitimate uses, what was happening is some ISPs were using it to create detailed profiles on people because they could see the packets of what they were browsing, and they could see all of the metadata, and they could build like really, really complex profiles on everything you were doing on the internet. And an example of that was 2018, Charter was testing this idea of using deep packet inspection to build those profiles on their users. There's also something called search hijacking, where they redirect these searches to also get information on their users. And this happened in 2011 with many, Charter, Cavalier, Cogent, Frontier, and others. And they did this with a company that was sitting in the middle, helping them like redirect and hijack these searches. There's something called Rootkit. So this is very interesting, because when we're talking about the threats to privacy, we think about them sitting in that tunnel, in that pipe where the data is flowing right from your home towards the internet. But apparently what they did was installing what's called a rootkit in people's phones. And what a rootkit is basically is malware that is malicious most of the time, and is designed to access parts that it isn't supposed to of your either computer or your phone. And it's also designed to hide its very existence. So companies like AT&T, Sprint, and T-Mobile were using this rootkit called Carrier IQ to track everything their customers did. And although they claim it was just for purposes of understanding the network, it was discovered through research that actually was capturing other things, and it could reveal a lot of data on users, like what websites you visit, which apps you're using, which is very telling. Then we had super cookies. So maybe you're aware with cookies, when you're browsing online, a website sets a cookie, and this is used for them to track you online and serve you advertisement. Super cookies go a little bit beyond, because instead of the website setting that, your provider, in this case in 2014 Verizon, was taking over your HTTP connections, the ones that were unencrypted, and putting a special identifier that you as a user really didn't have control, so they could have this cookie. You could clear the cookies in your browser. It didn't matter because this would be set once you were like sending something towards the internet. And this was a way of them tracking you, and AT&T was going to follow suit. But again, Outcry in this case stopped it. But other things kept happening. 2015, there was this deal with several providers to ingest data and sell it. Small rural ISPs engaged in 2014 in what's called ad injection. So you were browsing a website, and now your ISP is injecting ads into whatever you're browsing. So you can start seeing here a trend that they start trying to use every possible technique to not just siphon your data, hijack your data, but also inject data into whatever you're using, which is a huge invasion of privacy. That is not the service you contracted as a user, and needs protections. And one of the reasons why I'm trying to list all these like difficult and mixed different technical ways of hijacking your data and intersecting it and exploiting it is many times we're asked what technical things are assurances that one can ask them so we can ensure privacy for our communities. And I highlight all these possibilities because they always find new ways to do it. So I think what we have to do is like just create an assurance that they won't use any data for purposes of aggregating it for profiling, advertisement. They won't share it. And that is just the best way to assure people's privacy. They're contracting a service, which is they want broadband. That's the service they should get, and they should not be getting hijacked for other reasons. And one of the other reasons why we're more on the side of just like this is the customer's data and it should stay like that is because not just because, as I mentioned before, the disproportionate power between providers and customers due to lack of competition, but also because there's what we call dark patterns. So dark patterns are ways in which when you interact with a website or an app or a service, they use language or graphics in which they lead you to make a decision that is not in your best interest. You might have seen when you look at some of the websites that aggregate flight tickets, they try to urge you that there's only 2 tickets left. Whether that's true or not, was shown that many times it wasn't, but this creates pressure on the user to buy something. If you've visited European websites, and now thanks to GDPR, you will see that they have this consent framework that you have to select what you want to consent or not. And although the default is that you should have privacy, if you've seen any of these, they're very complicated. They're very hard to understand. Many times you don't understand, is the switch turning in green means that you're not tracking me or that you're tracking me? So these are dark patterns. They're just designed to be confusing so people make the wrong choices. If I want you to click on allowing me to track you everywhere, I'm gonna put a green big button that says yes. And because users traditionally don't read all of these things and they just click on their green yes button, they don't realize that they have actually taken a decision that was not in their best interest. So when you start summing up this disproportionate power, these many techniques that providers have, and then dark patterns, which make it even harder to understand things that should be simple to understand, you can start seeing like how opt-out models are not really there to protect the users. They offer very little to none protection. So I talked a little bit about the content of the data, which we try to protect. Now a lot of the websites are encrypted, but there's also the metadata. So a way to look at metadata is you have a container that is carrying your information. And the container has a label, like when you ship something in mail, that has information of who's sending it, where it's going, and perhaps, you know, whether it's supposed to go through air or land and other details like that. Your data is what's inside that container, inside that parcel. And your metadata is that label that contains other information about where the the parcel should be taken and other details about it, like the weight. The internet has a very similar structure. You have the content, and the packet also tells you from where it's going to where, size of the packet, type, and many other things. The metadata has traditionally been ISPs and some government agencies have been wanting people to believe that it's not important because it doesn't contain the contents of your communication. It doesn't contain the message itself. But actually, they're very revealing. If I know from where you're connecting to where, I can figure out what you're doing, right? Like who you're communicating with. If you're going to a website about suicide prevention, that tells me a lot about you, even though I can't see the content of the site you visited, right? There's also techniques in which you can see the size of the information you're requesting. So if you go to Wikipedia and all of it is encrypted, you don't know what someone's looking at Wikipedia. One of the techniques before was looking at the size of the page that you were looking at. And if you had a list of all the sizes of all the pages in Wikipedia, you could sort of like link what kind of information that person was looking. If you're sending a message to someone and you send a picture or a video, it's going to be a much larger request. And for an actor that's trying to be malicious, that might be very useful information. So although metadata doesn't contain the data itself, you can start seeing how metadata actually can be very revealing, and why we also say when you have contracts with these broadband providers and infrastructure providers, it shouldn't just be about protecting the data itself of the users, but also the metadata. The DNS queries. DNS queries, if you go to google.com, your computer doesn't actually go to google.com. It goes to a server and asks, what's the IP address for google.com? And it gets a response of the IP. So again, like maybe going to google.com doesn't say much about the person if the rest of the content is encrypted. But if you go to suicide prevention, even if I don't know which parts of the website you browsed, I can tell a lot about you. So I'm trying to go really fast to give you time to ask lots of questions. But the big takeaway is there's so many techniques that these providers can use. So focusing in just one technique is not enough. We need to go beyond, and it's not just about the content, but it's also about the metadata that is important. And like users will not change whatever defaults they are. Most users don't. So whatever you choose as the default for your community, that's going to be what all users are going to have. Forget about other options. Like whatever default you set, that's what everyone's going to get. So questions?
Go ahead, Holly.
So Andres, yeah, you can scare the living bejeebers out of me. There's no question. But as an organization that's whose purpose is to facilitate the construction of network infrastructure and assure community, universal, affordable broadband, I'm at a loss to convert what you're saying about the risk into actionable items. And I don't even know if it's within our authority, because I think it puts strictures on the operations of the CUDs, but I'm open to the suggestions you might have. But it seems to me that as long as there's buyers, there's going to be sellers.
Yes, that is a problem. There's always going to be trying someone to siphon the data of people through many ways. Depending on the powers you as a board have, I would say if you can put in the contracts things like you will not use the data collected from customer data like financial data, location, zip code for other purposes than serving them with the interconnection, or that you want to use the metadata or data of their users browsing or use of the broadband, I think that would be very strong if you can have that as a contractual obligation. And we have seen this done by other communities.
I'd love to see those examples, and maybe you would share those with Christine.
Yep.
I have to say, as a lawyer, I never met a contract provision that was very useful if it wasn't enforceable. And
Yep.
so it's pretty hard to know, is there, going all the way to the other end of the spectrum, is there any reason why ISPs should be monitoring anything but the volume of data use?
They will give you a lot of reasons.
But is there any good reason from your point of view?
I think there's times where looking at congestion, for example, the volume, as you said, is useful. I have a hard time believing that they need to do the other things. Many times they will talk about security, but it's not the role to provide security. You can do that in your router in your home if you want that. So I think they're just finding pretexts. I think, as you said, volume is important to manage congestion and to help redirect resources appropriately in highly congested times or areas. Other than that, no.
There's been a lot. Patty, I'm going to keep asking questions until you tell me that somebody else has their hand up. There's been a lot of litigation around individual user use of ISP networks, and and extending downstream to things like Facebook and so on. So in those instances, ISPs have been held liable, I believe, for the illegal purposes of their customers. So in other words, they were obligated to know what was happening by the use of their network. And I know most internet providers, therefore, have a long list of subscriber rules that say things like, you can't use our network for illegal purposes. How do you monitor that if you're not looking at content?
I'm not a lawyer, but as far as I remember, they're not obligated by the law to intercept all of your traffic and look at it. We do have assurances of privacy. Of course, I think it's very convenient for some to sell that idea, but they're not obligated to that. If they get a lawful request from law enforcement, they can give information about what they have, but that doesn't mean they have to intercept all your content all of the time, right? There's differences when they have a lawful request for a specific target, then they might carry out interceptions. Or if they have logs of IPs, they might provide logs of those IPs. But beyond that, they're not legally required to intercept your traffic 24/7 of every user in the country. There's a difference between like whether they have a lawful warrant or not.
Andre, this is Patty Richards jumping in. Is there specific language, consumer protection language with standards of best practices for privacy that we could use to look at relative to weaving into our grant agreements?
I can send you examples of what I think are good examples. I don't think there's a standard. Many have tried very different things. I think the biggest difference between many frameworks is the opt-in, opt-out. Europe, for example, is very about opt-in. So you as a user have to tell them, yes, track me, versus other places in the US, states, where you as a user have to go out of your way to say, no, I actually don't want to be tracked. I think those have been the main differences. Other things will be the legal definition of personal identifiable information. And that will vary a lot from very, very narrow to very broad. Some places will use language that say it has to have your name. And that is when it's your name on your address, that's considered identifiable. Europe will say it doesn't matter whether your name is there or not. If you know the name of the person, if you can single out a person, you're already identifying them, hence it is personally identifiable information. But I can send you parts of different languages that I think are the best.
Okay, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Mhm.
Brian or Dan, do you have any questions? Okay, I see some no's.
So we do have a member of the public that has a question. I don't know if the board wants to invite that or not. I just wanted to point it out.
Why don't we save any questions and comments for the public comment period at the end? Because if I open it up now, we potentially open it up to everybody on the call, and I see there's 20 plus people.
But is Andreas staying the whole time?
I not. If you want me to come back at the end, I can try to come back.
It does appear that person's hand went down anyway, so.
And we can always get a public comment question to Andres after the session. I would not have you hang out for the public comment period, stay on the call.
And if you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer them. I will send you the information that you requested.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Christine, anything else?
No, that's good.
Okay.
Thank you, Andre.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andre.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. We have
So-
prepared a slide with the motion, revised motion, if we want to go there.
Can you, Rob, I'm not sure exactly what that meant.
So before this presentation, we noted that staff would come back with a revised motion related to the policy of using grants and just what our authority as the VCBB is.
Right. I would prefer that we take it up at the next board meeting rather than try to.
Well, we actually, we have a time-sensitive issue for this, so it's really important. You know, this ties to the material issue, which is later on the agenda.
Well, Christine, you can ask the board for authority to make grants for specific purposes without doing this overarching proposed motion, right?
Right.
Yeah, I just want to make sure the board understands clearly that the preferred method and we'll get into the materials discussion. Okay, we won't talk about this now. We'll go into the materials discussion, but it's going to get back to the same place.
What was I going to tell you?
It's
Okay.
going to get back to, as we talk about individual things in the budget as well, just knowing that we have this authority. Like, for instance, we're talking about some of the shared services, and it might be easier because of a lot of the contracting issues that we find a third party to do that and grant them the money to do it. So this is kind of an overarching, like, philosophical thing of defining what our power is.
Yeah, but
Does-
even as rewritten, how I'm reading this is that you're saying that staff has the authority to grant, and that's how it looks on paper, whether that's how you need it or
We
not.
seek board authority.
You seek
To enter
approval
into
approval to enter into grants. Approval to whom? Necessary or convenient to its mandate and subject to budget and programming guidelines. I guess I would have to see what the level of detail in the budget and programming guidelines are, but I just don't understand. Like, you don't need approval to have approval to make grants. Do you know what I'm saying? Dan, maybe you can help.
Yeah, I just don't see. I don't see what does this give that is not present today. What does this provide beyond what already exists today? I don't see this as being additive.
Okay, I mean,
It
that's all right.
gives us
We'll
another
go
It
we'll
gives
go
us
into the
another
discussion. Yeah,
So what is that tool, Rob? That's what I mean.
So
You can seek approval to enter into the grants from the board today. What is this doing? I don't.
Do we
So the-
need to have an executive session? It sounds to me, or it seems to me, that there is a piece of this conversation that may warrant executive session so we can understand the situation more clearly. Yes or no?
No,
I
I
don't
don't think
believe so. I think it's more,
Yeah, it'll
I think
flush
it's,
out.
I
We're
think
gonna
it's
cross
more,
this bridge. Yeah, go ahead, Rob.
All right, let's have Rob
sorry.
speak so we're not talking over one another.
I think it's more that like throughout the course of the past few months, there's been questions of whether we could do a grant as opposed to a contract to Vacuda, for instance. As one example, way back when we were first discussing the fiber stuff, there was a question of whether we could do a grant to a provider to supply the fiber. This is trying to help us as staff understand what tools we generally have at our disposal. So that's why we want to get the board preferably just on the record to say that the board agrees that grants, as long as they're within state, federal guidelines and approved by the board, are an allowable tool at our disposal.
I don't think there's any question about that. I don't know where you got the objection, but I'm not tracking the need.
Okay, all right, we might be mistaken then, but we felt like we were running to this past board meetings.
Yeah, if everybody
Let's
if
proceed.
everybody agrees, this is weird, kind of almost making an emotion, but we're gonna go forward on that assumption.
Can you
Is
just
that
give a
fair?
real,
So
can
I
you
don't-
just, can
I
you
am-
just
I
give a
am-
real world example of what this solves that
I am
does not?
super confused right now, and I don't want staff walking away with a, a grand theme that we've just given you authorization to do something. I'm very super confused right now.
Okay,
Yeah.
we want authorization to, I'll just use back the shared services example. I want authorization to be able to come back next meeting and say that we've looked at the shared services we would like to provide. They'd be better suited to be provided directly by Vacuda. We are going to issue a grant to Vacuda upon approval to the board to provide these shared services. Like right now, the bond counsel. There's various things where, especially attorney-client privilege, make it a lot more beneficial for it not to have the contract being held by us. So we want to know if that is an example of something that is okay.
I think in my opinion, each of these items, you're going to come back to the board and ask for some sort of discretion or some sort of authority to take action.
But we also want to know if we have if we want to be investigating that. If the board decides that we don't have that authority, well, we want to focus our energies. That's what it comes down to. We want to focus our brainstorming.
But Rob, I think what you're asking for is us to generalize using a specific tool that for a multitude of purposes. And I think you're getting the feedback that's appropriate, which is this granting, we have broad discretion to make grants. Yes, we do. I think it's great to point that out. So this is not wasted time. But
okay, I think we can move on. I think so. That's we do believe we run into this obstacle in the past. It sounds like we've got that covered. Now let's move on, and we'll talk. We'll address these specific items later on.
We feel like in the past there's been a lot of focus on just the 2 grant programs and using contracting for everything else. That's what we want to get clarity on.
I think there may be some
misunderstandings. I think we got it.
Okay.
We made our point.
But statutorily, there's nothing preventing additional grants outside of pre-construction and construction, right?
That's right.
That's
right.
our opinion.
And
that's all we were looking
That's
for an endorsement on. That's all.
Yep.
Okay, so just to be clear, walking out of this, there's no new actions or authority that the board has authorized, right?
Nope.
I know this probably is beating the horse till he's beyond dead, but I want to say that the way staff approaches things, if you are clear about what your authority is when you're coming in to make a recommendation, there should be no problem.
Agreed.
Okay, well, let's move along in the budget then, I guess.
Yep.
Okay, so I think that the next part, I believe, Christine, is you and I to talk about just this is something we just sent over. We decided to try to pare down what was in the giant budget document into some of the things we're thinking over the next 18 months.
Yeah, we need to talk about what we're going to do this budget period first, Rob, before we talk about next budget period.
Are these the 4 slides you sent over, Rob?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. The only one I added was this, but that's, yeah.
Wait a minute, is there something
Are you
new?
yeah, there's nothing being shared right now if people think there is. And when Andres was speaking, there was also nothing being shared if people thought there were slides projecting.
Yeah,
I
there
didn't
was,
see any.
there was no slides in that presentation. I will
Okay.
share this right now. I just took, while we were discussing, I took down the motion, but let me put this back up. And we can go into, Christine, when different things are happening. But this is what you saw previously. Okay. So, and something got a little funky when I converted with the fonts. I apologize, but at least it's showing on my screen right now.
Okay, so this is not in the packet, Rob, is that right?
This is not in the packet. This is summarizing stuff that is in the packet, but this is
Okay.
something that was sent over before the board meeting and will be posted online, as with all presentations after. But we just felt this was an easier way to explain some of the things we're looking to do in the next 18 months, since we're not looking for specific approval of the budget at this time. We're looking for more of a general, are we heading the correct direction?
Yeah, but Rob, I think we are looking for approval of the changes of the current budget. Did you want to push that off another 2 weeks, or do you want that now? The changes for this current year budget.
All right, go for it, Christine. We'll go back to the budget packet. I'm not fully clear. I'm just turning this over to you then.
Yeah.
Should we go back to the board packet?
We can start with a highlight of what the budget's looking for, but specific. Go back to that presentation, Rob. And so what I want to get out of this meeting before we move is first thing is to approve the changes for this year's budget. Then we will talk about next year's budget. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah, and Christine, is this in response to the last meeting in terms of representing a budget to actual as to where we're at, or is this different?
Yeah, that's exactly where we are.
Okay. Thank you.
Go ahead, or if you want me to pull up any of the other stuff, let me know. I'm confused at where you want me to be at.
I'm very confused, but anyway, let's start. Let's pull up, because what the board asked for was specifically where we were at. That's what Patty's referring to, Rob. So let's start with this year's budget.
Okay, what page is that in the board packet, Christine, that you want me to turn to?
Okay, I'm going to find that.
Page 19.
19? Okay, thank you.
That's where we started.
Okay.
Okay. So what I did is I got this. Patty and I worked together on summary, and what I'm telling you is where we're going to be at the end of this year based on the current spend plan. So we're going to be even with the changes we recommend here, we're going to be under budget by 197,000. So we'll transfer that money over to 2022 budget. But the personnel is under budget by 146,000. And of course, the reason for that is the delays in hiring. It's taken us a lot longer to hire. In fact, in one case, we haven't been able to hire at all. Equipment's under budget.
Christine, what is our fiscal year? Is it ending June 30?
June 30th, yep.
Okay.
So we have 1 quarter left. Let's see. Miscellaneous costs are over budget. I didn't realize cell phones were going to be charged to that line item, but we'll fix that next year. Now, the contracted services are over budget by $469,000. And there's a reason for that. And that's what I want to get into here. So first of all, let me say that training and education is under budget to the lack of a statewide workforce development program. That's still very important. We'll talk about that next year's budget. Our board costs are significantly under budget because I had planned 3 meetings per month and we're doing 2. So that's, so overall, you know, we're way under budget on training and education because the workforce development program just isn't there yet. We want to take that, some of that overage and apply it to contracted services. And those contracted services are as follows. It's really important that we get a statewide cost estimate for the non-CUD towns. When we present it to the legislature that $350 million was adequate with what we know today, doesn't take into consideration inflation, for providing 60% equity to what we estimate to be a $550 million construction effort. That did not take into consideration the non-CUD towns. We don't have any design or estimates for that. So first priority is to get that work done, contract to a design firm to do a high-level design for the non-CUD towns and the rest of the state, and come up with an estimate of what those costs are. Right now, we're kind of estimating there's about $42 million. You know, the back of the napkin estimate says that we're going to need another 60% of $42 million, but we don't want to sell ourselves short. So I want to take these one at a time. Are there, you know, questions from the board on that first item? Any questions?
So I have one. Have we carefully looked at the act, and you know, we don't have enough money to do what we're doing. And now we're saying, okay, the non-CUD towns need to be addressed, and they're causing, by being non-CUD towns, additional expense. I mean, if they were CUD towns, it would be less expensive for us to serve them.
Well, no, that's not the case. It'd be the same price.
No, by definition, your resources, you, Rob, Stan, Alyssa, you will be stretched and less effective because we have non-CUD towns. And I'm kind of wondering whether whether we're really clear that we have to serve all these towns.
Well, the goal of Act 71 is to get everybody connected.
Well, I'm going to look for that goal and how it's stated, but you know, maybe I'm just looking at the whole thing going, oh boy, you know, some of these towns just didn't want to be part of a CUD. That's our methodology. If Laura were here, I can hear it in my ears ringing that we gave towns a way to participate. They became part of a CUD.
The towns can still participate in the program.
All right.
They could be.
I should note we do have a separate budget item later in the agenda that discusses non-CUD towns and what support we're going to provide and what we're not going to provide.
Okay.
But you know, Stan, you want to weigh in on that? If I got that right, Stan, that the towns can participate. We actually in Act 71 have an obligation to provide grants to telecom providers for towns outside of CUDs.
Yes, it's eligible provider definition.
Right.
Okay.
And one of the purposes in Act 71 is ensuring broadband availability to all Vermonters and Vermont addresses.
Done.
Other questions?
So we just thought this was one way that we could help. It also contributes to our longer term plan of looking at this at the statewide and seeing where there's things need to happen to ensure redundancy and to ensure the resiliency of the entire network. So it would achieve several different goals if we did look at those towns in the context of what needs to happen and what needs to be for the larger cost estimate for the entire state.
So Christine, in a nutshell, you're asking the board to basically repurpose about $470,000 for the statewide estimate for the non-CB towns, statewide program for FCC maps, whatever this item is, the 200K, in the logistics and application support. That's what the ask is today?
That's what the ask is, yes.
For me,
So-
what would be very helpful is before we do the ask, is that you provide the framing of where we are budget to actual right now.
Yeah, I'm doing that.
so-
That's right
As
up
of
there.
today. So,
Right in front of
so
you.
before we jump into repurposing dollars, it's very helpful to get grounded as to what is our financial position relative to what we've budgeted in terms of where we are at some, close of the month, February or March, whatever the date.
Okay, but I'll present that, but it's not accurate because they're still reporting problems. So I'll follow that in the following slides. I'll take you right through each one of those.
Okay.
Okay, go down to personnel next.
Okay. I'm just trying to orient you what will help make
So,
sense.
but before we leave,
Decision-making.
but since we've had that conversation so far, Patty, is it fair to say that, or do we want to ask any additional questions about that repurposing? Because I don't have a problem with it, but I'm not sure. I'm not, I agree with what you're saying in terms of trying to do it in an orderly progression, but in terms of the ask, I'd be ready to make the motion.
Yeah, personally, these three items don't scare me. It's just you're forecasting to the end of the year that you're going to have excess funds, and I just want to get on the same page with you that I understand that.
Yep, all right, well, I was presenting at a summary level, but I can go, I have the details in your packet, so I can go there.
Okay.
That's the will of the
And
board.
can I just ask real quick? So on the 470 grand, we're not talking about this is just a reallocation of internal budget. It's not an expanding of the overall budget, correct?
That's correct. It's a reallocation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, Rob, swing down to personnel.
Can we use a page number? Would be awesome.
I don't know where they are, Rob. Can you?
Yeah, I need a page number, please. I'm not sure. I simply
Yeah, I
see it
don't know.
there, and then it goes to
We don't have
this.
are there page numbers in the packet?
Yeah, just do the PDF page. Whatever.
Yeah.
PDF has
All right,
pages.
let me see if I can find it. Okay.
Yeah, I'm just scrolling
All right,
through.
so
Here,
go to,
is it this one?
Could it be 25?
25,
This
yeah,
one?
got it. All right, I'm using PDF pages. All right, got it. Okay, so you're at personnel, and if you look at these numbers, where we are today, it says, we planned on spending $454,310. Right today, it only shows $174,364.08. But there's problems with this report. And Patty's going to go figure it out. Because the number I used, there's the way I calculated the cost of personnel, and I used the state. Basically, you do an hourly or annual rate, you multiply it times 1.8. That's the cost of administrative overhead for the state. And I come up with a number. Well, those numbers haven't all rolled in for some reason. She's confirmed that the 1.8 is correct. So the forecast number I'm giving you is based on the 1.8 carrier. So you can see that we're you would think if you're based on a run rate that you would take that 174 and divide it by 0.714 because we're 5/7 through the year, that we'd only have a $200,000 budget. But what I'm telling you, the board, that's not happening. There's errors in the way it's being reported from the state and delays, and Patty's got to dig into that and find out what's happening.
And
So I don't want
Patty,
to.
who is Christine? It's not Patty Richards. This is some other Patty.
Patricia LaRose.
Thank you. I'm
I
like,
was
I'm
gonna
not doing this work.
I thought, Patty boy, you're gonna get the green eye shade out and do the whole thing.
So this is why I was trying to give you a summary, because the month-end reporting is still not right. And it may be just the long delays of how the state reports. And I don't want to give the board a false impression by saying that we're at 174,000 now out of a $454,000 budget. You don't assume that we're going to be, 200,000 at the end of the year. So I'm using that 1.8 carryover and saying we're going to be $18,000 under budget at the end of the year. Does that make sense?
And the year ends when, Christine?
June 30th.
June 30th. Thank you.
And we probably won't find out till August or September based on how long things take on the state.
So Christine, you're trying to characterize this carryover of $18,903 as a conservative number. Is that accurate?
As a what number?
Conservative number.
Conservative number.
Yes. Yes. And so that's a sub number. If you go down, there's some other things we had funded. In fact, you can see the confusion about how Rob's being charged. It doesn't make a lot of sense. But anyway, there's a lot of problems with reporting. But that whole 147.
But the punchline here, right? I think the punchline here is you're just giving an update that as it relates to the personnel section of the budget, you're forecasting to be about $19,000 below budget, which will carry over to the subsequent year. Is that the punchline here?
The punchline is a total of 147,000 because there was the deputy director stuff. What I'm also saying is I want the directors moved in. You see, there's a whole mess there too that needs to be put into a.
Yeah, I can't. I mean, to be frank, there's clearly mess here, and I know you're working to clean it up, but I know that's not an easy thing. But I'm just trying to get to the punchline. So you're forecasting as of today that you'll carry about 147 grand into the next accounting year out of your personnel line item. Yes?
Yes.
Great.
Does that work?
If that's the best information you have with the systems you're contending with, I think that's okay.
Okay.
Doesn't
So
raise a red flag for me.
Go to the next
Equipment and
page.
software.
I just want to make sure that everybody agrees that we're not checking Christine's math. That's not our objective.
No.
And actually, we really appreciate that this has been horribly difficult, but we'd rather know how you look at it from what you see than how it isn't a system that is not reporting.
Yeah, that's why I went to the first page, because that's how I see it. That if we go line item by line item, you're going to see that there's reporting problems with the state. I'm not sure how valuable that is to the board to know that line item by line item, but you requested to go into the detail, and I'm providing you the detail.
I mean, Christine, this just gives the flavor of the repurposing ask. So if we're going to be repurposing dollars, this just gives a sense of how you got there, that you can cover by doing these other expenses, these three other things, how you're going to cover it. So for me, this is very helpful.
All right, so good. So equipment and software, we've still got some purchases we're going to make by the end of the year, but the carryover will be about 10,311. Miscellaneous costs, I don't think you want to go into that, but anyway, that's where the phones are getting charged. I only planned on office supplies, but apparently the phones I wasn't going to argue this one, but we'll let the phones go in there and I'll just budget appropriately next year. Contracted services, next page, Rob. This is the biggie, of course, because unfortunately, this page, that's on your front page. This is where we're getting the carryover of 469,000. Unfortunately, got cut off, but you can see, we haven't spent anything here yet, but we know we spent money because we know we spent money because we've been doing GIS services. It's just the bills haven't got here yet, or it hasn't got credit deducted from our account. All these numbers still show zero usage. We know we've done GIS support. We know we have not done the fiber optic engineer, and we have not done the legal support yet. So anyway,
just to clarify one thing on here. It's the legal support is going to come out of the 315 fund since we didn't do the grant writer for USDA Reconnect. That's one thing that's different. The fiber optic engineering, like we do have a contract now, just as we do have a contract for GIS support.
right. The bills haven't come in yet. That's my point about the whole.
But it is obligated.
So Christine, in this section, it's not clear from here what your estimated total carryover is. So I don't see a number.
I don't see it.
Yeah, that's because I got off, but I'll go to the front page. It's on the front page. It's on 19. Hang on. The contracted services, it's essentially we show all those funds are obligated, so that becomes there's zero carryover there.
You say contracted services are over budget by 469,000, right?
No, well, that's after I transfer the money. Now, don't get confused. We're going through the budget right now.
So easy to.
Yeah. So stay focused on the budget item. The question was, what have we spent so far? Well, we haven't spent it. It is confusing, but let me just try to clarify.
I get it. It's out, right. It's been committed but not spent.
Committed but not spent. So therefore, we have zero carryover for this line item. You follow?
Well, no, because it's the same as your personnel. You have open personnel slots that have not been filled yet, which is creating an under, which you then carry over. Why is this different?
Because these are contracted services. You obligate the money for the contract service. That's the way it works. So
and the obligation is going to be satisfied before the end of the quarter. Is that right?
Yes.
Carried.
Yes.
So okay.
Yeah.
Before the end of the quarter, which is thus the end of the year?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll catch all the way up by the end of the fiscal year.
End of the year. Yep. Yeah, I shouldn't say by the end of the year report, which will be delayed because the state has to do its thing.
Okay. Thank you, Holly.
And Christine, you think we're gonna not only are we gonna start the work, but we're gonna finish it based on the dollars you projected. That's what you're saying.
We're not going to finish it. We'll obligate the funds.
Okay, so you don't have to. All right. Okay. Okay, keep going.
And then training and education, which is on page 31. We're anticipating in June there's a broadband community summit. We're anticipating giving out scholarships one scholarship to each CUD to go to that summit, and have 2 members of our staff go. So that pretty much will take care of that line item. But the state workforce development item of 611,000, that is not spent. We're paying for training. But anyway, that money's going to carry over. We're going to carry over 599,000 because we just haven't got the training programs in place. So that takes you to
wait a second. I'm sorry. You're going to carry over what?
599,000.
I'm just looking at the numbers here. I'm going to assume your math is right, but okay. I guess I was trying to get my head around. So 11 people are going to this summit, and it's going to cost about $2,000 or just under $2,000 per person. I get it. Okay. So it's really workforce that's the carryover there.
Workforce is the carryover. Yep.
And that's your main bucket of overage, or not
That's the
overage,
main
but
bucket of
excess funds.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Okay, and then go back to page 19, Rob. So that summarizes 2021 end of year forecast.
Mm-hmm.
Capital budget, I think we all understand that we're gonna have a carryover on that one. That was, that's the design of the program.
Yep.
We're counting on the carryover to keep the construction flowing because anyway, I think hopefully that's self-evident.
Okay. I'm sorry. I'm still a remedial learner. So you had on that last item, you had 599,000 that's going to carry over. But you're saying that your capital budget will have 121.8. Oh, I see.
There's an operations budget, there's a capital budget.
I'm sorry. I screwed that up. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
So you don't have a total here of what the carryover on the operations budget is. Is that right?
Yep, total carryover. It's on top of the page, 2,000, right below the bolded print. Overall, under budget by 197,000.
Okay, that's what I was looking for. Yep. But where's that 599 in the?
That's after, so you can add 700,000 to that, because what I did is I said, we'll reallocate 700,000 to that. If you add 700,000 to 197, you get $897,000 carryover.
Which is the real true carryover.
Yep. That's the total of all the carryovers.
One other thing I should note is that where it's the 2021 budget, that's actually fiscal year 2022. And the other one is fiscal year 2023. Just to
no,
make
Rob,
sure we understand.
2021 runs from July 1st, 2021 to June 30th, 2022. 2022 runs from July 1st, 2022 to June 30th, 2023. Follow?
Okay, I thought it was, okay, sorry.
Yep. All right.
Before we leave the FY21 discussion and the carryovers, should we come back to this question about reallocation? Patty?
Okay, Christine, do you want to take action on these 3 items now?
Yeah, I mean, I think clearly these 3 items are going to be over whatever I'm qualified, so let's just assume that I need a board vote for these to approve these expenditures.
Can you explain the FCC maps and the logistics for the BEAD equity grants?
Yes. So the BETA funding, the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Funds as a part of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, has $42.5 billion that's going to be allocated for infrastructure. The minimum amount available for each state is $100 million. Plus, there's going to be an adder based on every unserved address, underserved and unserved address. The FCC maps are recognized for the entire country as being way undercounting.
Wait, you're moving to a next topic. So those the BEAD Act grants, when you call them equity grants, there are subcategories in there too that are digital equity, right?
$62.5 billion total. So I am talking about the specific program to challenge the FCC maps right now. I'm not talking about the equity part program yet, okay?
Okay.
So stay focused on bullet 2.
Okay.
There's a total of $62.5 billion available in the BETA program. $42.5 billion is allocated for network construction, right? It's for building infrastructure. That $42.5 billion is going to be allocated first, 100 million minimum per state. Plus, there's going to be an adder for every underserved address you have that you can show. Now, the issue is the FCC maps are highly inaccurate right now, and they're showing far fewer underserved addresses than there really are. And our state's done a better job, but we still believe there's significantly under number of addresses that are underserved that are not shown. For example, in Groton, Vermont, they did a study of about 120 addresses that were not served, that were shown on the map as being served. So the idea of the beta program is 100 million minimum, plus there's going to be a dollar amount given for every underserved address. It's in our best interest to challenge, and all states are doing this. They're doing a challenge program, and then they're investing money to do these challenge programs. The FCC has set up a challenge program, so they're gonna have these new maps out. We know they're gonna be wrong. We want to set up a challenge program so that we can maximize the amount of funding we can get out of the IIJA.
So this would
Okay.
effectively,
I
if
just want to welcome
successful,
Laura to the conversation. Laura, we are talking about the current fiscal year budget to actual and doing some repurposing of funds. That's where we're at right now.
I just want to welcome Laura into the meeting and let her know that we heard all about data privacy and came to the conclusion there's no problem.
I can't wait to watch and listen.
So Christine, if these challenge funds are successful, it would result in what's effectively more grant funding for Vermont, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
And is it reasonable to say that if you spent $200,000, you would likely get more than $200,000 worth of additional funding?
Yes, very confident that will be significantly in the many millions.
And how are we using the Department of Public Service data in this process or not? Are we redoing their work?
Well, yes, we'll have to check. There's two ways to challenge it. The best way to challenge it is through a state challenge, updating our state maps.
Well, is that something that the department wants to work with us on?
Well, they will, because, well, I haven't talked to them about this yet, but either way, we're going to challenge it.
I'm only asking because I'm sorry.
I think there might just be more we have to find out about this, because my impression is that the new maps are going to be using that PSD data. We may just need to fine tune what the process is going to be and at what stage we're going to be doing this stuff.
PSD data is wrong. PSD data is wrong. That we've seen that town after town where they found, because the PSD data has a whole bunch of assumptions in it as well. So we have to challenge our PSD data.
I'm thinking you're meaning DPS, right?
The Public Service Department is PSD.
Yeah, Rob, in the case of Groton, they found 120 addresses that were because it's self-reporting data is what the problem is. This has been a topic all across the country, because the way we do this, we don't do it from actual, we do it from the providers providing their information. North Carolina has gone as far to say that if you're on DSL, you're not served at all, because the physics are pretty clear. So our maps are inaccurate by definition.
I think that's a policy question for the board, I think, too. I wasn't realizing that's where we're going.
What is actually involved in actually doing the FCC challenge maps? You're going to hire this out to somebody?
Yeah, we'd hire it out, and they would, the way the model, Georgia has got the model. They're deploying volunteers throughout the state to work with every community and to get speed tests done over time. You can't do it with just one speed test. You've got to prove it over time. There's a whole challenge process.
So did you get a quote for the 200? Is this a guess? Is it an estimate?
This is a guess. It's not a quote. This is an approval of a limit.
Okay. Okay.
Didn't we have a conversation with the,
Yeah.
I've always called it the DPS, so I apologize, the PDS. Haven't we had a presentation by them? And didn't we have some early on conversations about how they projected data that we thought was a bit of an issue for us? Is this a chance to correct that misalignment?
Yes, and by the way, you know, we'll work with the DPS and come back to you on this, because there's more work to be done. I just want to give you the you know, condition on the work we do with the DPS.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I recall the DPS was very transparent about, they acknowledge their data is flawed. Like, they never represented that it was pristine by any stretch. And they talked about the methodology and where the methodology was stronger and weaker. So I don't think this is surprising.
Yeah, we will work collaboratively with the department is where I'm going on this.
Patty.
Go ahead, Laura.
Yeah, I am very interested in us hearing more about that collaboration, particularly because DPS has more of a regulatory role, and so I mean it's just important, I think, to understand what they're doing, what they're basing on, why they're basing on that, and if we're making different policy choices, which I believe we likely should be, being really clear about what the difference is.
Christine, can I ask, if you win some of these challenge awards, are they able to be used for construction, or are they only able to be used to clean up data?
No, they're going to be used for construction funds. That would be the allocation. Yep.
So
More money is available.
So the challenge funds, which are based on getting better data, can be used for non-data things. You're sure of that?
Yeah, the actual. So let me go back. The FCC is going to issue funds for construction of infrastructure based on the underserved and unserved addresses you have in your state.
Yep.
So as we add more addresses, we get more construction funds for the infrastructure. You follow?
Yeah, but so I guess maybe I had the wrong mental picture. So just correct me. I thought you said, I may have heard this wrong. I thought you said that the challenge funds would result in a award of the challenge funds available could result, if we're successful, in additional dollars from the challenge fund entity to then do additional construction. Sounds like you use the challenge funds to clean up your data, and then when your data is better, then you qualify for better construction funds through a different funding mechanism. Is that right?
Yeah, we're requesting money to do the challenge.
Yes.
I think what Brian is saying is, how does that money come back to us?
We don't get the 200,000 back.
No, but we get better data, which may get us more construction funds.
That's right.
Right?
Right.
Yep.
Okay. Yep.
So it's
Dan, you're
okay.
right.
It's
Alyssa,
like
might
doing
have
a
something
census
clarifying.
head count.
Yeah, right, Patty. Yep.
Right. If you're counting number of locations, that's going to allow future funds to come our way. I think Alyssa has her hand up.
Yeah, thanks. I think we kind of got there, so I don't want to circle back around too much, but I did just want to say, basically, this is using funds we currently have that are in the budget leading up to the end of June that staff was proposing that we get ahead of some of the planning that we're going to have to do for the BEAD program we are not going to get the BEAD program money until 2023. So this is like us planning between July 1st, 2022 through December 31st, 2022. That
Thank
will
you.
help make our application, and just as Brian just understood and helped reiterate, it will help make sure that we have additional funds added to the 100 million allocation that every state is getting.
Okay, thank you. Christine, you have one more bullet item to chime in on. That's the third item, logistics and application support for the BEAD equity grant, 120,000. Can you jump in on that one?
Yeah, I
What is
think I'll
that?
have Rob or Alyssa talk to this one because I think they know it better. Rob, you want to take this?
I'm gonna let Alyssa take it because she's been looking way more into BEAD than I have right now, and I'm
Yep.
have to figure out where we are actually again.
And this kind of continues what I was just saying. So basically, the way it works is May 15th, when the notice of funding opportunity is released. Hopefully, it actually is released on the 15th of May. At that point, we will be able to submit a letter of intent that we are going to apply for and plan for and implement the BEAD funding. That letter of intent, once we submit it, we can also request $5 million of planning funds that can be used to help build capacity and add to this planning for the challenge, that can add to planning for the Equity Act, all of these other programs, that the equity assistance programming, some of the other interagency planning and collaboration efforts. So the way that they're doing it is we can request that in May, June, when we put in our letter of intent. We have time to do planning. FCC maps are expected around December, January. Hopefully that's even close to when they get released. After that, we'll be able to, after we do our challenge, after we do our planning, we'll be able to submit our initial proposal. That will get us, once we submit our initial proposal, we'll get 20% of our allocation released to start work. Then following that, well, there's like a 4-step process basically. So basically right now we're just trying to figure out how are we gonna increase capacity, figure out how we can do planning for how we integrate what we're currently doing, planning for the BEAD funding that's coming, and all the requirements based on for the application and the reporting side of things.
So Alyssa, is the
Thank you.
120,000 to hire somebody to do this work? Help me with what the 120,000 would be spent on.
Sorry, 120.
Yeah, that's the budget
That's
amount, 120,000 is for a contractor to help us do the work. Yes.
For the, I think that's specifically to look at helping us with the challenge process. That is a requirement in our proposal for BEAD funding.
The 200,000 was for the challenge. There's 3
Okay.
items there. Go to page 19 again, Rob.
So Christine, what is the 124?
120 is to hire a consultant to help us apply for these funds. It's to give us some contracted help in order to get the applications in place so that we can get the additional immediately. Is it up to 5 million or is it actually 5 million, Alyssa?
So the NTIA is still confirming if the 5 million we request is above and beyond, or it ends up coming out of the future budget, total budget. So I'm still waiting to hear back from them on that, but we can request, I guess it's up to 5 million. You can also use of the 100 million, you can use up to 2 million for capacity building, for staff contracts, things like that. The way that they're breaking it up. Again, all of this is, there's a playbook that they put out, and I've been doing the webinars, but until they actually put the notice of funding out, like some of this stuff is not going to be 100% factual or but that is basically how they've been explaining it.
So we're requesting 200,000 for the, specifically for the challenge program. And again, that's we're obligating it by the end of the year. Doesn't mean we're going to spend it by the end of the year. We're obligating it. So we won't be come back next year. Then 120,000 will be for the consultant help in order to fill out all these grant applications at the VCBB level.
Are these different consultants, Christine, or the same kind of subset of a company?
They're, well, it's definitely a different set of skills.
Okay.
In some of the presentations that I've seen, some states are using, there are consulting companies that have been able to kind of package it all together and pull in different people under one contract, but it has varied state to state how people are approaching this. We are also kind of at a different part in the timeline than some of the other states, since we do currently already have a program that, and we're like a quarter of the way into the program that some states haven't even started thinking about yet, right? So like the timelines don't totally match up because we're using ARPA funds for what we're currently doing leading into the infrastructure money. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and the other states that are behind us are spending millions, so we're that being ahead of the curve has helped us a lot financially.
Is there any other questions on these three items? We're being asked to repurpose dollars up to about 470,000.
Patty?
Yes.
I apologize. I think I came in just after discussion about the non-CUD towns and the memo that we provided. No, I'm seeing Holly shake her head. Guess she's only got one, and you're muted, both of your heads.
I don't think we've talked about that yet.
Stan's memo?
Yes, Stan's memo was in general. Stan's memo was a general memo about using our power to do discretional, non-competitive grants to accomplish our goals. It didn't have much to do with non-CUD towns. It had to do with everything.
Okay, so we did discuss that, or we did not discuss that?
We did discuss it.
Okay,
There's
so
no action that was taken, Laura.
okay, I would just, I just want to, if I might, I apologize, for coming in late, but this is kind of a foundational issue. So if I might just have 3 minutes, Patty, on this, or no?
Okay. Before we go there, can we finish up the budget?
Okay,
Yeah,
I apologize. I thought this was part of
let's
that
close
discussion.
on 2021, and then we can go into 2000. There's a logical break point here. We're talking about 2021. We can, you know, if the board can close on this, we can move into next year's budget, or we can talk about Laura's issue right now. But let's just close on the 21 component.
All right, I'm going to put a motion on the table that we approve reallocation of up to 470,000 for purposes as delineated in the memo to us for the statewide estimate of high-level design for non-CUD towns, statewide program to challenge FCC maps, and the logistics and application support for the BEAD equity grant. Is there a second?
Patty, I would second that motion if you would take this friendly amendment that it's the amount out of FY21 funds.
Yes, I welcome that amendment.
I second that as amended.
Okay, it's been seconded. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye. Not opposed. In favor.
Okay. No opposed. The ayes have it. Motion carries. Christine, do you want to go over next year's the 2022-2023 fiscal year budget.
Yep, why don't we,
Then Laura, we're going to come back to Stan's memo.
Rob, can you pull up the presentation now?
Rob, you're on mute. If you're...
Okay, so if you look at what we're focusing on,
Okay, what page are we on in the packet?
it's not in the packet. This is just an
This
overall
is the
presentation.
supplementary, and look at the screen that we're sharing.
All right, thank you.
So obviously, you know, from a programmatic standpoint, we've got money in here for broadband construction grants. Workforce and economic development. We're developing the broadband. We're including in here what you'll see in here. And again, this is an overview, so I'm not asking for approval at this point. I just want to give you an entire overview, and then we'll come back. We're actually proposing developing broadband technician training incentives. And you all received an email from me earlier today saying that that's happening in other parts of the country. And this doesn't mean we're setting aside 60 technicians, $5,000 so we're setting aside $300,000 as an incentive. We're not necessarily saying we're going to pass that out directly, but it might be part of the labor contract. But we want to bucket this $300,000 to say we're going to provide up to $5,000 of an incentive per technician in order to attract people to Vermont to work here. That's kind of a trend that's starting to happen, and you know, we want to make sure we get the technicians we need. You know, even with our workforce development program, we have a problem because we're now in our second set of training. So people are signing up for the technician training that's being offered by Vermont Technical College. But the problem we have is that every single technician that comes out of the training program needs to work with they're an apprentice. They need to work for 1 year with an existing technician. So in order to build the Vermont workforce, we need people from other states to come and help us. Our total estimates, we need about 216 technicians. We went and got, we surveyed construction firms and came up with estimates of how much work can be done. And we came up with an estimate of 216. So that's one category. We're also continuing to work with the VTC to get those folks trained. You'll see money in there for digital inclusion and equity assistance planning.
Wait a second, Christine, before you go on. So what is the quantify subgrantee impact on economic development? Is that part of that description that you just gave?
Rob, can you explain that bullet? I don't know what that is. Who wrote that bullet?
So this is programmatically over the next 18 months as kind of going back a bit as Rob was starting to present. These are things that we're going to need to do in these different buckets. So in addition to creating, we're going to have to be thinking about all of the different reporting that we need to do. So we're going to have to capture metrics related to workforce development.
So this is not about ARPA money. This is not about the money we have today. This is about if we can attract additional, or no, when we do get additional IIJA money, we're going to need to do economic impact reporting. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. So, we talked about digital inclusion and equity assistance planning. That's actually, we'll get to that later, but that's in there. We talk, planning to meet the BEAD requirements. That's going to be in the budget here. We need to, have help. meeting the BEAD challenge requirement. Now, accountability reporting, we've decided, working with the state Office of Finance and Management, Administration and Guidehouse, that we really need to deliver training to all of the executive directors and their assistants. Every CUD needs to have somebody who's focused on grant reporting, because, you know, naturally the issues with the volunteer boards and new executive directors is and the fact that the treasury requirements are changing. We need to provide training. So you'll see that in there, that we need to
It's also
train.
just a matter of all these grants, just by definition, because the amounts are high risk. So this is one way we're working to mitigate risk and do our due diligence to make sure we're watching after these funds, as well as providing the shared support that the CUDs need to interpret all these wonderful guidelines.
Okay, next, is that, keep the slide moving there, Rob. What's below that? Okay, yeah. Anyway, next slide. Yep.
There also is in there contracting to assist us in reporting these results as well. That's the final thing on the slide.
There's what I sent you earlier. That just came out. You know, $5,000 signing bonus for Midwest Fiber Solutions. So the competition is on for technicians. Next slide.
So we'll talk about that more in a second, but we feel like we need to do something along those lines to promote the workforce necessary for publicly funded broadband projects, publicly owned broadband projects, to be clear. So is there a question?
Yes.
Laura?
Are we taking questions right now, Patty? Yes.
Yeah, go ahead, Laura.
Okay. So just about these incentives, which, you know, I definitely support the notion of this type of incentive. I would hope that we would be working with the construction companies and having them do this, and this would not be something that we would then be managing this workforce, these types of workforce incentives. Are we envisioning, are we contemplating potentially managing this ourselves, or is it intended to be with the construction entities?
With the construction entities,
Right.
I believe. We still have a lot of things to work out, but we know we don't want to be doing individual grants. That's something that's way outside of our capabilities, and this would be something better dealt with at the individual construction level. So there's things to work out, but this is just an idea of where one of the ways we're heading when it comes to dealing with the workforce shortages we're going to face in this next year and foreseeable future.
Yeah, I would say pretty much I think this is the only strategy that's worthy of our investment, because we have short-term needs and most of the other workforce issues are longer-term investments.
So can I add a little footnote onto that?
Okay.
It might be worthwhile, in considering the magnitude of the construction grants, to be funneling these kinds of dollars through the construction grant process and make them part of the construction contract payments, so that you have deliverables that are real and meaningful to the CUDs.
Yeah, that is definitely one of the options we focused on, is working through this. So there's a chance that it doesn't get spent, because if it goes through the construction process, it gets capitalized, of course.
So just as a little background, like, we had a staff retreat where we started brainstorming of the different things that need to happen. So we have the programmatic side, as well as, okay, well, what do we need in order for that to happen? Which is where we're heading now in terms of what we're talking about is expanding the staff a little bit. Right in the Treasury guidelines, everything with BEAD, they encourage you to have the capacity you need, especially because of the reporting guidelines. And I don't have the quote in front of me. Alyssa might. She's totally on top of everything when it comes to BEAD and all of that. But this is just an idea of what we were envisioning as a draft. To be very clear, it's a draft. This isn't what we're necessarily proposing yet, but to get initial feedback on. So
Yeah, Holly,
Holly?
do you have a question or is it your hand
Go
still?
ahead, Holly.
Yeah, I'd like to give you some initial feedback. I would love for you to consider hiring or contracting with an accounting function, a person who did budgets, who did tracking of dollars, because I think we're bogging a lot of people down in that. And if there was somebody who could do that function for you and the board, I think it would free you up.
Yeah, that's
Yeah, and that's
so
actually
that's a
in
good point.
there.
Yeah, if you
That's
see the TBD, a business office and grants manager, that's exactly what we envision there.
That
We
it is
really
not, but that is not what I'm talking. I'm not talking about a grants manager. I'm not
No, we're
talking
talking
about
about
a
business
business office
Yes,
person.
we're talking about a business office. The business, I think of it like the CFO, right? The idea is it's clear to me, we're gonna have to come up with some kind of outboard process here to manage our funds because the reporting in the state it just doesn't work for us.
Right.
and just to be clear, like, yeah, this business office and grants management would deal with both sides of things. It would deal with our budgeting. It would also deal with, right now we have Kristen over at the department that deals a lot with the oversight side of things. This would assist us with our contracting. This would assist us with our grant writing. This would assist us with, it would really be the partner on our side to Kristen's position that is at the public service department.
So I'm urging you to think carefully about using the term business office because it sounds like the person who's buying paper and staples.
Oh, yeah, that's
Yeah.
not the intent.
So
Yep.
you might want to rethink. I know you're thinking in the right direction, but
Yep.
I'm giving you the feedback that that's what was conjured up for me.
Yeah, and
We're doing
of
our
course,
best to try to use
I think the
existing.
CFO, right? We have to figure out a state name for a CFO because that's what we need.
We're a little bit limited right now. We were trying to use position descriptions that exist currently in order to speed this up. So that's why sometimes the titles don't necessarily match with how we envision them. We took what HR has listed. So we looked at what was under that position, even if the title didn't really make, we'll leave it at that. State processes.
You want to keep going on this, Rob, or you want me?
Sure, because this actually goes into it with a little more detail.
No, okay, go ahead. Yeah.
So one of the new staff persons is once again bringing back the broadband project developer. I am still doing that, but I'm also doing a lot of other things. And the type of technical support, the amount of technical support that's going to be necessary, and some of the some of the CUDs that are a bit further behind. Like the idea of this is to also, I'm sorry, I'm down at the bottom, the rural broadband technical assistant specialist. I apologize, I went out of order here. We want to be providing additional support to redouble the community efforts. This also could, having somebody that's at the disposal of the CUDs a day a week. So it's a different way of structuring it, but providing additional capacity for the CUDs as they move along. So it's
when you
bringing
say a
back
day a
that.
week, we're talking about a day a week per CUD, right, Rob? So
Yeah, there's not that many days in a week, but
yeah,
but yeah, let's spread out over
yeah,
spread out over time of actually,
a day
okay,
every
well, you
2
have a
weeks,
specific task. We're going to work with you on that task. So more focused, kind of back to the type of support that was provided originally, but taking it up another level and just using that position which exists, that job description which existed, and going from there. Then we have the broadband project developer, which we are realizing that it's as described, the position's a unicorn. We're never going to find somebody with all of those skills. So we're going to work on re-envisioning that and reposting that. And that's with Northern Borders. So special project managers, Alyssa, as you can see from now, she is doing a lot of everything. We want to move her into a different position that's more programmatic. We mentioned the business office and grants manager, so that's helping on the grant side as well as the business office side and the reporting side. So that's in terms of the staffing.
And then the staffing is a net add of 2, right, Rob?
Yeah, a net add of 2 over what's been approved. We already have the broadband project developer that is approved. And this is in many ways
and Rob, don't we need to get legislative approval for this?
it can either be approved within legislation, it can be approved by the Joint Fiscal Office, but there is a little process to approve these new positions. And what we would like is permission to start that process, even if they're not hired immediately. So we're ready, because as we all know, everything with state government has a process and takes time, because there's the time of getting the approval of the positions, then there's the putting in the putting into HR to classify and post and do all of those things. So this is more of us trying to get ahead of things, as opposed to trying to move away from building the plane as we're trying to fly it. But let's have the part ready and ordered so it can be inserted as necessary. Any questions on this, or should we move to context?
Just a general question on staffing. I would assume that the VCBB board can approve staffing positions, and we don't have to have an extra layer of approval for that.
That's a good question, because actually it is a good question, because the other position was funded by a grant. So maybe there was a difference, but that is something we should look into.
I mean, certainly how it fits in the pay structure obviously has to go through the state. But I would assume that we have the ability to hire and structure the setup based on what we think is a board.
Stan, would you look at that? Because I know it did call out specific staff positions and authorize them in legislation. So I don't know if our other powers supersede the need to go through the entire state process to make it happen. It didn't with the project developer position, which cost us well, we won't go there.
So that's an excellent question. We will follow up on that.
Okay.
I think Stan had something to say, and Holly was muted, but trying to. Okay.
All right, Stan, do you want to reply or respond, or?
Yeah, I was just going to say I'll work with the various state departments to figure out if the board can do this on its own.
Okay.
So I have this question though, Stan, for you on that. If you ask them, they will tell you that you have to do it according to their process. So I think you've been building a case about what that seeks to say we have broad authority to do certain things. And so before we ask permission, I urge you to build the case for why we don't have to ask.
Right.
Point taken. I will look into that and see if we have a strong argument to do that.
Yeah, we can hope and pray. So, any other staff questions on where we're going with staffing, or initial feedback of whether we can start various processes? Like we're all still working overtime is what it comes down to. And we're not getting everything done that we want to get done and feel needs and should get done. And the monster of reporting hasn't even happened that much yet. So
yeah, I gave Rob a hard time because he sent stuff out at 10:21 on last Friday night. So,
I really do have a life, trust me.
Yeah, and I was like, I was ready to respond, except I had a few drinks and I decided against it.
So, no problems with where we're heading?
Yeah, personally, I don't have any objection. I think that you are going to be running into more of a staff crunch hours-wise, so this is enabling you to kind of keep up.
I'm still hoping that business office and grants manager can be something other than just grants. It needs to be our budget reporting actual against budget. It needs to be a broader accounting and budgeting function, however the state describes that. So that's the only comment I'm going to be.
Holly,
I'm with you, Holly. I'm with you on this 100%.
I think Alyssa's trying to say something.
Maybe. That's just how the state describes accounting and all functions of accounting is they call it the business office.
Yeah.
Most agencies have a business office, and that they do all of the accounting and help with reporting, financials, up and down the line and help with processing of contracts. I agree
we are
with you
at
though.
2:12. We are at 2:12 right now. I'm going to push us along here so
Okay.
that we can close by 4.
We're almost there.
Is there anything else on the budget for next year that we need to take a look at?
Yeah. Yes, I want to go back to the memo briefly.
Yeah, we will come back to the memo. I look at that as
Okay.
not the budget, Laura, just so that you know.
Yeah,
Ah.
it will-
I thought it
There was-
was.
yeah, go ahead, Rob. So we talked about personnel, we talked about programs. Now Rob's going to talk about the contract, what we're looking to contract out.
Yeah, and we can, these are just some of the different ideas. We'll go into detail. You notice the Chittenden County thing. We're going to go into a lot of detail with what, if any, additional support needs to happen there later. So we can debate all that later because sure, we'll have a debate on some of that. But these are just some of the different things that we were talking about contracting out. So this includes, we want a real grant management system. We've been trying to use SharePoint to accept applications, and it's kind of putting a square peg through a round hole.
Yeah,
It's
it was a
not,
bit of a disaster.
we're moving away from that already with the application process, but having a real grant management system will help with reporting, will help with tracking, and make the user experience a heck of a lot better for anybody who is trying to apply and all of us that are trying to review. It's something we just need to get on, is what it comes down to. We already talked about some of the outside legal negotiation support, bond counsel. That may be something where we do one of these grants to Vacuda to be able to cover the cost of that rather than having it be pay for service from the individual CUDs. Like there's different ways to structure things. We're going to need somebody to go and inspect these projects as they come online. We realized with the broadband project developer, we're not getting everything. So maybe we need to contract for someone who can help us with, I don't know if creative finance is the best way to do that, but it's thinking outside the box in terms of developing other funds, other options to help fund these projects and supplement our grants and leverage our grants. The regulatory assistant consultant is another item that we have chosen a consultant already for and are working on figuring out the contracting. We want some outside support with grant writing. There's a lot of different things that we're talking about contracting out. So that's
Yeah, and I
that.
think the summary is, next year is the boots on the ground year. We're anticipating, we've been very busy this year, but we're anticipating, we're anticipating a very busy year coming up.
The one other thing we were going to talk about, but we can also hold off, we were going to give a little more of an overview to the board about the BEAD funding that Alyssa was going to do. But we can punt on that if you want to move on. As we do have.
Yeah, I think we can move on at this point. I think that, like I said at the beginning, we're not looking for an approval this meeting. We wanted to give you a high level overview. You have time to dig in and look at the numbers, and we'll pick this up next meeting.
Right. Once you start putting dollars to it, then that's when reality hits of, can we afford this, basically?
Yep.
Okay, that's excellent. Are there any other questions regarding the bullet items provided for this upcoming budget preparation? I see a nose shaking of head. So let's move back to the memo that Stan put forward so we can catch Laura up on what action we took, which was no action.
Great. So
Okay.
is that an opportunity for me, Patty?
Yep.
Or
Yeah,
okay.
Go ahead.
So in looking at the memo, and I've actually spoken with Ledge Counsel about the memo, and we did not take testimony on the memo yet, but I'm pretty concerned about the third bullet in here on the second page. Staff believes that the following are examples of types of activities the board could take in achieving this mandate. And the third one notes providing grants or engaging in contracts with any entity to solve one-off problems, discoursing the build out of public or private 100/100 service to a neighborhood. This could include creating a high cost program or finding the necessary conduit to enable fiber to cross a bridge or highway. I think that, I'm sure that that was not the intention. The intention was not to finance and staff and resource non-CUD activities. I'm certain of that. And so if the language is wrong, so I do not, you know, if I don't question Stan's interpretation. If the language is wrong, then we need to fix the language in the legislature. So we did have a hearing.
We've already talked about funding Bolton. You know, so you know, our interpretation is that Stan, you can repeat it again, confirming what I'm saying. But our interpretation is that our job was to get every Vermonter connected to 100 by 100. And 8% of the underserved addresses are in non-CUD towns. So if we say we're not going to deal with non-CUD towns, that means 8% of Vermonters are not going to get connected.
So I think the legislature provided multiple mechanisms for every address to be connected. And that was working through CUDs or eligible providers working with a universal service plan in whole towns. And
agreed. I think we're saying the same thing.
that is not what I read in that third bullet.
Okay,
so,
Rob, can you pull that third bullet up? I'm not sure.
Sure, I'm trying to help Holly. Holly got booted somehow. Let me get back to the actual packet here. Does anyone know what page?
It's PDF page 15.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What if instead of saying any entity, you just named the three designations you just enumerated there, Laura? Would you say it was a CUD, an ISP, or a whole town with a universal service plan?
Yeah, I mean, it's an eligible provider working with a whole town. So it is not, for instance, it is not, for instance, paying for a one-off project in a non-CUD town that doesn't have a universal service plan to work in a neighborhood.
Yeah,
So
I don't think bringing it back to the only eligible providers works. Like this goes back to being able to want to give a grant to Vacuda or another entity for shared services, or for, say, managing the procurement and supply management for whatever. If under that, there's a question of whether Vacuda would even qualify. There also could be the potential to give a grant for an RPC to take on a study as opposed to doing it directly. I don't think any of us are considering it as a way of going outside of the pre-construction or construction grant program, though. Like we're all committed to 100 by 100, and
yeah, but what about that language? They just promote.
No.
Doesn't that language work that Rob that was just stated?
No, that's what I just pointed out, that it doesn't, because that eliminates any entity, so it doesn't separate out.
Oh, I see where you're going. Yeah.
Yeah, like we could narrow it by saying like we're not fund any construction by any entity that's not an eligible applicant. Like that's one way of doing it, but
it still does have to be tied to Act 71.
Yeah, of course.
And I think that would alleviate concerns if you look at the language of, you know, the bolded language at the top of that page, to affect the purposes and provisions of this chapter and to carry out its purposes. I think that gives the protection that you do have to work with whole towns that have a plan, or you do have to work with a CUD. You can't go around those provisions that are in the act.
So I want to just let me ask this question directly. Does staff think that they have the authority to fund neighborhood work in non-CUD towns?
No.
One-off neighborhood projects?
No.
Conduit that connects to a neighborhood in a non-CUD town?
Nope, we've never had those.
That is part of the memo.
That was one thing that we, in terms of our overall goal of facilitating it, that if there was a gap in the larger infrastructure, like I used the example in the presentation of there's a gap over the bridge in 127. that where that if that could let a private provider do the last mile build out.
That is not your job. That is not our job. Our job is to support community broadband, which means it needs to start with communities, which means it needs to start with CUDs or entire towns who have a universal service plan with a private provider. And I think we discussed this in the Energy and Technology Committee last week briefly. I think there are ways, you know, I think we have had previous discussions, Holly and others, about the conflict in the language with the authority of CUDs. There are ways that we might be able to expand or connect through legislation that authority that exists for CUDs to Act 71. But I do not believe, well, I know that this was not the intention. The intention is not for VCBB to take on broadband writ large for the entire state. VCBB supports the work of CUDs.
And
Whole towns
whole
working
towns
with a provider that have a
Yes.
universal service
yes.
plan.
Right.
Yeah,
So
we-
in this example, for instance, that is a bridge that goes to that's the conduits missing is something that goes to Colchester. So it would have to be with a town. It would have to be part of a whole plan, is what it comes down to. It would have to be part of a plan to serve that town, and that this is one of the stumbling blocks that doesn't quite fit in our normal process, but is something that we could help solve a problem, especially one that allows more private dollars to go to solve the last mile problem and other problems, the other dollars to go elsewhere to help other places
But
in the state.
you know, Rob, I think we got a little bit down a sinkhole here, because the reality is, Laura, that example may have been a bad example. It might have headed down this, but the idea is that may be something you need to do in order to help a town achieve its universal service plan.
So I think we could
working
say
with
is
a
that
private provider.
we're going to be consistent with Act 71. We're going to be consistent to where it's community driven. We're going to be consistent to the 100 by 100 goal. Like, that's not a question. It's also with any of these grants, we have to come before the board anyway to get your approval. So,
Right. So if
yeah.
you come, so just in all fairness, if you come with a request to fund conduit over a bridge in a town that is not a member of a CUD, please bring with you the universal service plan for that town.
Yep, you got it. Any questions, Rob?
No, that's, yeah. So I just didn't want to limit it to eligible applicants because some of the support is not construction type support. So that's all.
So I don't understand what the difference is there, Rob. So, and here's why this is important. Here's why this is important to me. And I beg the board's forgiveness on kind of belaboring this point and being late. But the activity that we are engaged in has specifically been stood up because the market does not work for most of Vermont. And the places where the market is working, if they choose not to utilize the tools that are available for every town and every address in this state, that is not a problem that VCBB needs to solve. There are tools that are available. They need to use them.
I think I said that in her absence, Laura was going to have an opinion on this, right?
Yeah, and,
No,
and
that's
I just wanted to frame back to Laura that the board did not take any action on the memo that Stan put together. So there was a recommendation to delegate some decision making to staff, and we had a nice discussion about that we didn't feel that that's appropriate, and that we're going to continue as business as normal.
Thank you, Patty. And I wanted to talk about this because I've had a number of I think our staff is amazing. And I'm a little worried that they are trying to solve problems that are not their problems to solve. And in some instances, and we have a lot of work. So I would like to make sure that we're prioritizing the problems that we are supposed to solve.
That's well said.
Yeah,
Got it.
just want to be clear, we just wanted to get a sense of the board that if we did bring forth a proposal about a grant as opposed to a contract, that we are heading in that right direction, because it's something we've had questions about in the past. So
And I appreciate clarity. So thank you for
Holly
that.
has a timeout.
I'm saying I
Do we
think
need
the
a break?
horse is, I think the horse is dead and moldy.
All right. Okay. Are we ready to
Yes.
move along?
Okay.
All right. Let's move to item 6, purchase of materials and recommendation.
Okay, and just to make this easier for everybody down home, and because at home, and because there were a few small changes, I just created it as a presentation, so we can just go through it. The first slide, just to show everybody sees it.
And Rob, can you point me to where in the board packet this is?
The original one is at. Let me get there again. We're going to try something different with the board packet of maybe doing it as a Adobe portfolio or something next time around, or upload things separately, because we've heard from people in the public too that this is a little challenging to find things in. And as you see me scrolling through all this, it's challenging for me too.
Yeah, the board packets become so lengthy now that
It looks like PDF page
45.
45. Thank you.
45, but it's so the text on the slides is I've highlighted anything that's a change, so it's just easier to see. So I'm going to switch back to that one, but that's where it was in. So it just starts going into some background that we've done our due diligence. We've explored all of the state processes. We've had a lot of cooperation, but there still are processes that have to be gone through that would create additional delays, that would put at risk this construction season, and in some cases even next construction season. In all cases, we were directed back to that language to do whatever is necessary, and the preference of the Treasury Department to use our granting authority, whether it's non-competitive supplementary grants or our granting programs, in order to accomplish goals quicker. So we're recommending using this proposal. First, we define what specified lead time materials are, and I want to thank Holly for helping flesh out the definition of all of this. So we want to make sure if they're going to purchase anything, this is what they're going to do anyway, that it's very specific. It's not just like, oh, you have the authority to purchase whatever you want. We want to know what they're purchasing. It needs to be consistent with the outside plant design standards. These are all givens. We want a memo if when they're telling us they're doing this, either from the supplier or from the CUD, actually C and D got combined there, summarizing the supplier's response to the RFP, summarizing what these delays are. We need some kind of documentation, so it's not just like, oh, I got told that it's going to be 3 years to get this. We need something in writing. We broke it down into so limited availability in the next 6 to 12 months. So these are things for this construction season, for which if it's not purchased now, the price is going to go up 5%. If ordering a specific lead time material separately is going to cause a big increase in cost. So it's if you order a piece of equipment that is normally combined with another piece of equipment, we're not going to tell you to separate those two. And then the final one is what I added that's not in the board packet, is when I was calling around trying to work on this, fiber ordered today this is through NRTC, which is doing the other fiber purchase, wouldn't arrive till January of next year. So we need to stay ahead of it. So that's why I added that in there. Sorry, I'm a little lost here. So when it has to arrive, by August 1st or the start date of construction, since some are moving ahead faster, but that should be fine across most of it. So I also added in some materials that are otherwise meeting the criteria and have already been ordered. There was the advanced fiber purchase that are arriving. So this is a way to be able to re-leverage those funds again to purchase more materials. That's F. I think that would actually be E in yours. So the way that we're working it is this does go back to the pre-construction grant program. That's our preferred methodology rather than creating a new grant program. just in terms of the steps that would be involved. So it's going to be deducted from the CUD's construction grant available allocation. We're also transferring $4 million into the pre-construction program that's going to be allocated to the CUDs based on the same formula we've used for the construction grant program. I don't have those exact dollar amounts in front of me right now, but for instance, 30% of the funds are going to the NEK. They're allowed to purchase the material for the next 24 months. How's it going? What we're going to do is that if the amount that they need exceeds what is available in the pre-construction program, plus whatever allocation comes from this $4 million, it is deducted from their allocation in the construction grant program. So this provides flexibility and this cements the connection between the two programs. So I just clarified that. We don't want to approve grants for materials in excess of $6 million. We set a very high threshold there. But if you are purchasing the fiber for next year, it's possible that you could get near there. Holly, did you have a specific question right now? Or a typo?
Yeah, I do.
I'm sure they're there.
I'm just following along with the deduction from the construction grant, and I'm a little bit, this is fiber, this is construction stuff. Shouldn't we be deducting from the allocated available construction funds? This is kind of a way of extending your construction funding if you're ordering early. And I just don't think that that's an incentive that we intend.
I'm not sure I understand.
You said that there's the $4 million, there's the pre-construction grant, and if you exceed that amount, then we'll deduct it from your pre-construction allocated funding. I'm sorry, I said it wrong. Then we'll extend it from your construction grant allocation.
Let me try to explain it another way, and you might be objecting to that as it is. So I'm saying, say you have say CV Fiber, they've already taken most of their allotment, if not all of their allotment, for the pre-construction grant program. They're going to get some more money from this $4 million. They still have a need above that. So that need above that would come out of their allotment from the construction grant program. So it would be transferred over to the pre-construction program.
Yes, but why shouldn't everybody's got an allotment for pre-construction? Everybody's got an allotment for construction, right? What you're saying is this, and I think I've just answered my own question. Just because people are ordering materials that have this special criteria applied to it, it doesn't allow somebody to take the pre-construction money that would have otherwise gone to another CUD.
No, not at all.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that's why we're keeping that's why we're keeping all the money segmented for that reason.
Well, and is there any reason just to keep funding in pre-construction for each CUD, because aren't there other expenses like legal that they're going to want to spend pre-construction funding on? So if they rush in, spend it all on fiber, then they don't have any pre-construction money left.
So you're actually saying that it's any purchase should come out of the construction grant funds.
I am, because I think that was originally what we would have intended. That's
a really good point. Yep, yeah. That's a good point, Polly.
Yeah, no, I'm fine with that if we can figure out how to word it, that it doesn't touch their existing pre-construction allotment, that it's the $4 million plus we would transfer over from their construction grant allotment into the program.
You can say it any way you want to. The other way to do it is to just put the $4 million in the construction grant bucket, but okay.
Yeah, that's where I was going to go, Rob. We can talk about this, but I think might be simpler just to say we're going to take the allocation against the construction grant for the materials that are going to be used for construction.
Yeah, it's not the construction grant, though. It's the funds currently allocated to the construction grant program.
Yeah,
because this is where we ran into problems, because there's extra requirements for the construction grant program.
Yep.
So it's not.
We got it. We got it, Holly.
We understood how we would have to do it.
We'll take the soft line. We got it.
Yeah. So trying to see it. Okay, so yeah, we don't deal with that in the motion, but we will figure that out of where it comes from. But this
Yeah.
is, that's what we've devised. And once again, if we need to come back, I can rewrite the motion and have it be more specific. But I think we're all on the same page that the existing allotment to the pre-construction should be used for all the capacity, all of legal, all of those types of things. The money that's available for the purchase of materials is from the 4 million that's being transferred over. And then it's additional money that would be transferred over from the allotment for construction into pre-construction for materials.
Yeah, why don't we reword this motion and come back? Yeah. Hopefully by the end of the meeting, Rob.
Well, definitely by the end of the meeting.
Yeah.
I think all you need is an amount of money that's specified, not the source of it necessarily.
Okay, well then we might have it with the motions that's there. So the CUDs have up to $6 million to use for the purchase of materials.
That's good.
So keep it simple.
Yep, good motion. And then if we need more than that, we'll come back.
Yeah, ideally, yeah, I'm not even going to go there, but
yeah.
Are you ready for that
Any
motion?
board members have concerns about this motion?
So I do want to point out that by making this motion, we will be authorizing staff to approve $48 million worth of materials, hypothetically.
So we're approving the amendments with this motion.
In a year.
So it's 6 million, up to 6 million per CUD?
Yes. And our assumption is not that a lot of this is going to be used because the construction grants are going to be in and it'll be all packaged there. But this is getting a head start to address the unusual circumstances of the supply chain shortages.
Mm-hmm. All right, Dan and Brian, any reactions from you? Because we can't see your face.
If the funds, I don't have any, if the funds are there and it meets the standards that we set, I don't see any problem. It's the right thing to do.
Thank you. Brian?
Nothing for me.
All right, can we make a motion? Can we move on this?
So moved to adopt the motion as stated. The 6 million, I want to clarify that motion. The 6 million is per CUD.
Correct.
So I would like the motion to be amended to say 6 million per CUD per fiscal year. Okay.
That makes sense.
All right, Rob, do you have the motion, the revised one? I just want to make sure we're clear on what we're voting on here.
Let me just type it. Let me just see if I can switch to.
Well, I think put up the motion and then we'll say what the you're amending the motion to include the language that says it's 6 million per CUD and that it covers the fiscal year. I don't think you need to necessarily type it up. Let's just in the minutes.
Right. I just want to be very clear on what we're approving because this is kind of a big deal.
Yeah, Robert's rules says you'd motion the amendment and then motion the main motion, but I'm not going to hold you to that.
Thank you.
Okay. So
considering I'm not
Robert's rules lately.
So, Rob, what we have is a motion to amend the motion.
This is not a motion yet.
This
is not a motion of the board. This is a staff document. This is not a motion, Christine.
Yeah, I'm just saying that to save time, he doesn't have to type it up. What we're saying
I may have just done that to make it simple here. So
perfect.
Let me see if I can just. Are you actually seeing it right now?
Yes.
The PowerPoint
Yes.
screen. Okay.
Perfect.
To include up to 6 million for the purchase of specified lead time materials per CUD per fiscal year, consistent with the process and policies as detailed in the staff's pre-purchasing of materials recommendations.
Good job, Rob.
All right, Holly, does this get to the heart of it? Holly, is this the motion you want to put on the floor?
You're muted, Holly.
That was a yes, yes, and a yes.
Okay, all right. I'm going to second this. Is there further discussion? Okay, hearing none, we're going to take action. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the ayes have it. Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. That's been a
Thank
long
you.
slog, but we're there.
Yep.
I want to
Okay,
point out
so
that
that brings us
the
to-
process was important and the
Yeah.
memo was important. So let's not lose it.
Yeah, agreed. That brings us to item 7, Chittenden County non-CUD towns.
This is going to be a fun one. Why don't I just introduce this as it sounds like House Energy and Tech is going to take some action, and I thought it would be good to get board opinion on if there's anything we can support or any ideas. We've heard from plenty of Chittenden County towns. We've heard from MC Fiber that's attempting to work with non-CUD towns. Want to do that. We also thought it would be useful to clarify an assumption that we have. So an assumption we have for the CUDs is we're doing our best to provide them with 60% grant funding towards the cost of their overall universal service plan. That assumption should also carry in individual towns. Like we've stated many times that we expect private providers, if they are going to take on a project, to have some skin in the game. We're not going to fund 100% of the project. I just want to make sure that that's incredibly clear and see if there was any reactions. But the second thing is,
so we're, our goal, our stated goal of the legislature, I think is that, hopefully everybody understands that we're trying to get a 60% equity position. Some of the private providers come in and want us to give them 100% of the money they need. What we're saying here is we'll give you up to 60%. In other words, we won't treat you any different. This is, again, assuming a town is working with a private provider and they have a universal service plan. They come in, no, we're not going to give you the whole thing. We're going to give you up to 60%. I mean, that's in fact, that's not fixed in stone. We want a good contribution.
But that's like a general rule of what we're going to be looking to, and it could be in kind as well. Like there's different ways to do it, but we just want to make sure that yeah, I don't need to beat a dead horse there. I think you get what we're saying. So any reactions to that first?
Yep.
Laura?
I would,
Go ahead, Laura.
yeah, I would just encourage those towns to form a CUD. I think that would be great. Ask for money to do an engineering study and, get to funding their one-off neighborhood issues that they have. So.
So I don't see any argument with that one. Go ahead, Bob. Go to the next one.
Yeah, so I'm just going to show a slide from the presentation that just outlined what people have brought forth as challenges that are happening right now. And there's this whole question of who develops the universal service plan. One answer is they need to form a CUD if they're having trouble with that. Another answer is, do towns need the power to be able to create that plan as opposed to leaving it to individual providers? So that's one issue. And there is a bill that does talk about making towns eligible applicants. That's pending. The other issue is the scattered address question and then whether there's additional planning necessary. The other issues are more of the existing infrastructure issues if we wanted to address these on a policy level. And we already talked about gaps in infrastructure, but there's other things that are not necessarily specific to these towns, but helpful. Like a lot of the new developments that are being built by a single project developer or multi-dwelling units or mobile home parks, where there's an exclusive right to use the conduit that really locks anybody else out. So that is one thing that would help certain providers in Chittenden County make the business case for being able to expand. Like that's one of the big issues that in conversations with Burlington Telecom is there's less incentive to go to an area that's all new development and they are locked out of the conduit that's there and everything is underground. It's also an affordability issue when it comes to multi-dwelling units that the FCC is taking some action on, but perhaps we should make a statement of policy as well. So I just threw a lot out there, but I'm going to just throw it open to the board to discuss of what we should say when we're called back in front of House Energy and Tech again, if they do make changes.
I'd like to hear what Laura's got to say about this.
I mean, I said it. I've said it.
So even when there's these, so the universal service plan in the orphan town can address actually each of these items, right?
Yeah.
Except for the underground utility and the gaps in infrastructure. I mean, I think there's a policy issue on the part of the VCBB there.
Only if these are CUDs or towns that are working with a universal service plan and a provider, an eligible provider.
And if you can't get an eligible provider to work with you and you're an orphan town, your opportunity is to join a CUD.
Yes.
And what if a CUD doesn't want to accept you as a member? Like this came up in some ways from an issue where initially we're talking about, oh, like some of these towns could join Northwest, but it would crash their entire model because of the makeup. So that's the crux of it. If a CUD won't accept them as a membership, what are the town's options? They need to find another town if they're going to create a new CUD. Is there a role to play for the Regional Planning Commission in these areas? Is there some other way to provide the same type of oversight and accountability and planning that's necessary to solve these problems? Or is it we have what we have? And I don't know. I'm just thinking there's going to be some action and we should maybe have some ideas to put forth that.
Yeah, I mean, I think likely things that you may see, if anything at all, likely things that you might see come out of energy and technology would be some sort of, something that looks like the emergency line extension program that was in place right outside of COVID. And as I said, potentially, tying that CUD authority to work in neighborhoods adjacent to them, connected to the grant programs. And I'm not sure any of those things are going to emerge. I mean, I think if VCBB thinks that there's feels really strongly that there is something that they are not authorized to do and that they should do, I mean, I think it's important to weigh in.
Well,
As
then
I said, it could be policy stuff about conduit that also affects CUDs as well.
Well, I think the policy thing has more to do with the electrical regulations, not a general policy. I mean, I don't know that we want to be overruling electrical standards, but maybe the committee, Energy and Technology Committee, would take some testimony from somebody who's in charge of electrical regulations about why mobile homes require conduit. I know I have been schooled that they do. I just don't know the why. So there's that. But I think for, as I think of myself as a taxpayer, I do think I would encourage, in fact, maybe even urge the technology infrastructure, Laura's committee, to consider doing a rule about adjacencies, because adjacent to CUDs, because when the wire center is split, there's a disincentive for providers. And I would like to see efficiency in the way that we utilize the federal dollars to get as many people covered as possible. And I know that there's a challenge in addressing universal services. This is an old conversation, but I do think that where there's a reasonable effort to discuss universal service and part of the universal service requires a CUD to act on the borders of its authority, that maybe there is a way to authorize that. That was really badly said, but I think you know what I'm trying to say. I'm pooped. Does anybody else care about that? I just see people with, split wire centers, nobody serving these folks. I'm worried about them. There are situations where towns are being told by carriers, don't you join a CUD, we'll come get you sooner or later. And if the CUD can be authorized to make it part of a build plan that makes sense, I'm wondering what the conditions are. It's certainly the tail wagging the dog. We have lots of other work to do. This is an exception.
I'm going to show one example of that where it's not just a wire center issue, it's more of just convenience. And this is from my presentation last week in Colchester. So you have Milton up here, and it's hard, I don't have a pointer, but so like these addresses would make sense to be served from Milton, which is a member of a CUD. Potentially these addresses as well, and these addresses as well, since they border a CUD and would be, it's this, like it would make sense to be served from there. So a CUD may be able to access them sooner than others, but they wouldn't be able to access any grant funding unless there was a plan for the entire town. So this is as much about an issue of grant funding that's on the table and locked up versus a situation like this. So I don't know what the solution is. I just wish that there could be a way for the CUD to get some funding potentially to be like, oh, okay, well, we're going to claim these parts of these addresses and get them served, even if we're still waiting for, like, this is all cabled for the most part, and there's just a few pockets. And most likely, Consolidated's planning to build out 200,000 addresses. They're not going to get to 200,000 unless they come to Chittenden County. It's not planned this year, maybe in future years. So
Rob, what are you saying? You're saying you wish that Colchester had a means to do what?
I'm saying I wish that there was a means for the CUD to be able to serve the addresses that are bordering or closest for them to reach, where it would be natural for them to serve, and to be able to access the portion of the grant funding to be able to do that.
Yeah, it's adjacent addresses. It makes,
Yeah.
when you think about it, it'll be the least expensive way to serve those. If you look, Rob, that's a great example. If you look in the northwest or the northeast quadrant there, yeah, you can see that. Why have the CUD stop at the town border if they can do a short extension and get some of the unserved address in an adjacent town?
But right now, there's no incentive, since that would cost a lot more money to do, and they can't access any grant. It would cost more money, and they don't have grant funding to do it, even though they are the natural provider to reach those addresses.
Who doesn't have any grant funding to do it?
The CUD wouldn't have. We can't offer any additional grant funding for those miles, since there's no universal service plan for the town of Colchester, for instance.
Right.
Since to get a universal service plan, they would have to serve all those little dots that are at the end of cabled areas to get there. Like, they wouldn't even be able to serve this tiny connection here that makes sense that they're, like, I don't know. It's just, I see it as a problem, but
there are some sensible exceptions that we should be allowed to fund, is where we're going here.
So I definitely don't agree. But if there's a policy change around connecting the authority of CUDs to the funding of the VCBB, I mean, I think I kind of think that's what you are saying.
Like, well, maybe, it's something. Maybe it's something that allows CUDs to access the grant funding, even without there being a universal service plan for adjacent locations. But it's hard to say that's only for CUD. I don't know. Can we say it's only for CUDs? Because there's the example here. There's the example down in like Weathersfield. Like, is there a policy way of doing that? just for CUDs. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, again, I will say, I think the policy is working. It is not, this is not an unintended consequence.
So
Well,
your
didn't we-
message, the culture.
Didn't we
Your
cross that
message-
already in pre-construction with the EC fiber proposal, Rob? Didn't we, the board
No, we
allow
did.
them to go?
Where we said is that they would have to have a universal service plan to get construction funding
Oh, I
for
see,
that. That's
okay.
why they're working with, that's why they're working with TDS to do it. And
Yeah,
like I have a
okay.
slide, I can show that they're doing that.
Right.
It's just a little bit different in areas where there's so much cable.
Yeah.
So that's why I do see that there is a tiny bit of a difference here.
But the community universal service plan is the lead-in to this.
Right. But the only people who develop the universal service plan, it's a provider having to figure out with other providers how to serve all the addresses in the town. Like
And the
maybe there is a
difficulty
role
here-
for the towns.
Colchester is a good example because the difficulty here is it's all cabled and we're only funding 100 by 100, service infrastructure that's capable of 100 by 100. So you got this big problem here where, the incredible cost. You'd have to build out all of Colchester with fiber just to hit some of these addresses.
And we don't have the funding for that. So ideally it would
Yeah.
be a private provider that does that. And like one of the letters we got that was in the board packet was from MC Fiber that I believe was showing that they had and this is just one entity saying it, that it was like 30 miles that they were going to have to build in order to reach the underserved addresses. And there was no way that it was going to be feasible grant wise, even with a contribution by them or somebody else to do it. So I know this is just a subset of addresses, and there is something to be said that they start their own CUD, but it's how to get them ahead, because these are towns that didn't benefit from a lot of the previous programs, and possibly because they didn't see it as big of an issue.
Yes,
I think
time.
because they
even
are
if they
well
form their own
connected.
CUD, they're
and-
not going to do it.
Yeah.
Still got the same cost model.
I would just point to, our extremely rural and under-resourced communities in the Kingdom and Southern Vermont and other places that have managed through volunteers to come together and figure out how to access grant funding and get programs, and access all of the resources here at the VCBB. I have tremendous faith in our largest county that they can, if they so choose, with their providers who are making a lot of money in Chittenden County, come together to resolve this issue using the tools that have been provided.
So is there any role for the VCB at this point, whether it's policy about conduit, policy about adjacent communities, or are we just sitting tight?
Well, I'm going to mute myself because I think my position is clear.
Yeah.
But I would say, I think if the VCBB wants to push on that neighborhood, connecting the authority of CUDs to the funding of the VCBB, that may be an appropriate place to encourage. In my opinion, the board can do whatever they want and they can outvote me, so.
I am reluctant to pursue legislative change because once we start going down that path, we don't know what other items might come tumbling down. I would not pursue a legislative change. We have what we have, and I think we work within the confines of what we have.
And what if it's proposed? Like this was the thing. For me this last week, it was between board meetings where I had to come in and present, and it's likely that could happen again. So that's why I feel it's important to get the sense of the board. And if we should say, no, it's keep things the way they are. Let's see where things go. Let's look at this next year, which has kind of been our view all along of let's see how this all works.
So Rob, are you asking if whether or not staff should be proposing legislative change?
I'm not saying that we're going to be proposing anything unless the board says that we should, but in terms of responding.
But it's not a response. What Rob's asking is, how do we respond to a change like that? Do we just say no?
I would like not to have the VCBB staff pursuing legislative change. In the event it comes through another vehicle, then that's different. But I'm just worried about opening up this legislation because once you go down that path, It's Pandora's box, and you lose control over a situation. And I don't want to lose control over funding and what we have already. It's very complicated when legislation starts to open up, and we will end up with a mess after that, is my fear.
Yeah, there is one piece of legislation that was introduced. I'll pull it on the screen. That might be something that they take from as they try to create something. So maybe it's of deciding what we should say on this. I don't know. It's hard when we're dealing with hypotheticals, but the way things are moving.
Rob, I'd like to hear from the rest of the board too.
That's yes, for sure.
We heard from Patty, we heard from Laura.
What do we have in front of us?
This is H712, which was introduced. It may be something that they look towards, or maybe something that's not going anywhere. I don't know, but it's the one idea that's actually been put in writing so far. So.
And would this dilute the funding to the CUDs? Because we have a set number of dollars. We have a set number of dollars to allocate out. If all of a sudden we open it up to individual municipalities, that's going to dilute the funding.
It's only non-CUD municipalities, and that's how we have our funding divided already. So it wouldn't open up any additional funding, is how I'm reading this here.
Exactly. So we have a finite number of dollars to divvy up. And if we just add new parties to the table, we're going to be dispersing a fixed amount of dollars over a larger group.
The total amount doesn't change. Right? It's all this is saying is that a town could come together. Like remember the awkwardness in Bolton where it was, oh well, Waitsfield has to reach out to consolidate.
No, I totally get that, Rob. But we've got $150 million. The number doesn't change if I add the town of Bolton, the town of Underhill, the town of Colchester. If we add those towns, we're going to spread $150 million over all the CUDs.
We already are.
And the 3 towns.
We already are though. We divided it. Yeah.
They have so the funding has been allocated even if there's no or held even if there is no CUD or a town working with an eligible provider.
Rob, could you remove this legislation since it's not in our packet? We're not seeing it.
It is in your packet, but it's on page 52.
So Laura, time out, Rob. So Laura, the funding allocation was set up so if a town that's not part of a CUD came forward, there is money set aside for underserved people in that town.
That was a news flash to me because I was listening to staff talking before about the funding that's, we're letting these towns leave money on the table. I'm like, they're not leaving anything on the table. They're not part of a CUD and, they're not operating in this way. So they're not eligible for funds, but we have VCBB. We apparently have set aside funding, which makes sense for all of these addresses, even in non-CUD towns.
Okay. All right, so that does not dilute then if somebody new came to the table.
It doesn't, but I would not say that it's their funds because they're not eligible until they take actions that make them eligible.
Mm-hmm.
Well, right now it's that an eligible provider could apply for those funds if there's a universal service plan for a town. So, but it can't be consolidated. So for a town that's entirely served by consolidated, it has to be a whole other company that comes in and proposes what to do, which is certainly possible. But there's no role for the towns to play.
Unless they join a CUD.
Unless they create their own CUD at this point. That is correct.
Which is the whole point of our existence.
Is it possible for a town to contract with an adjacent CUD for covering a portion of their town that is adjacent to the CUD territory as long as the town has a universal service plan?
Thank you, Brian. That's where I was going with that.
Yeah. It seems to be an open question. But I think in terms of if they're using the grant funding, it's not a problem. They could do that. So if Colchester had a universal service plan that somehow was developed